It's time for our Halloween special. This year, I asked my viewers to send me their scariest, allegedly true stories, and I would narrate them in order of least scary to most scary. So here they all are. Keep in mind, this ranking will be my opinion of which stories I find actually creepy or not. Just because I don't think they're creepy does not make them bad stories. So that means the ones I find creepiest will be at the end. Also, this is not a ranking of believability. Real quick, at this point in time, only the first and second place winners of this contest have claimed their prizes by replying to my email. So if you sent me a story for the contest using the username RoseCoopera, check your email. I emailed you because you won third place. You've got until November 30th, 2021 to claim the prize, or it will be forfeit. Before I begin, I want to thank everyone who sent in their story for the contest. Even if your story didn't make it in the episode, I greatly appreciate you writing it and sending it over. I think overall the quality of these stories you guys sent was fantastic. Now then, sit back, relax, and listen to me read way too many scary stories for your Halloween pleasure. Creepy Rest Stop from Ramshackle 1202. I'd driven up to Oklahoma from Florida to visit my aging mother. I drove instead of flying because I stayed for 3 weeks and I didn't want to spend the money on a rental car. Also, to save money on a hotel while driving the 1,400-mile journey, I would pull over for a few hours sleep at a rest area. Usually, just about 3 or 4 hours was all I needed, depending on how tired I was. All went well on the visit, and as I headed out on the return home, my plan was the same. I passed through Birmingham, crossed into Georgia, and soon began the turn south towards Florida. I'd wanted to leave earlier in the morning, but I ended up getting on the road after lunch around 1. I didn't sleep well the night before, because I was concerned and worried about my mother's health and how, at her age, although she vehemently opposed it, she was about ready for a nursing home. It was around 12:30 or 1 a.m. on the drive when I started getting really tired. It took another 30 to 40 minutes to find a rest stop along the highway. It was dark and pushed back off the road. There was a truck parking down on the side of the premises, and car parking was available all around the area. I pulled in and angle parked a little further down from the entrance to the bathroom to get away from the streetlights that spread about 15 to 20 yards apart along the curb of the sidewalk. They provided shadowy light around the few scattered cars parked down the aisle from me. The bathroom and snack machine area were dimly lit, like maybe some of the lights were burned out around it. There were a few other cars parked down the way when I arrived, and I jumped out to purchase a bottle of water from one of the vending machines, then used the bathroom. The place was nice and clean, but for some reason it gave me a really creeped out feeling. There was a heavily wooded area several yards behind the facility that was dark, and I couldn't make it out very well. It was a cool night in late October, and after rolling the back windows mostly down, I hopped in the back seat of my 12-year-old Mercedes S430 with a pillow and got fairly comfortable. I'd set the alarm on my cell to wake me at 4 a.m. After a few hours, I was awakened by a car door from another vehicle that had parked only 2 spaces to my right. I lifted my head and thought, sheesh, thanks, bud. There was a tall, lean, nerdy guy with glasses and a long-sleeve white t-shirt on. He shut his door and headed to the latrine. There weren't many cars there to begin with, and now most of the ones that had previously been there when I arrived were gone. I suddenly heard a sharp scream from the bathroom area. I lifted my head again and squinted across the dark walkway and grass yard of the facility. There was an ominous figure dressed in dark clothes with a black hoodie and a shiny object glinting in what light was available that could only have been a knife. I couldn't tell where he had come from, the woods or the bathroom, but it looked as though he was accosting the young man, taunting him. They were off in the distance, and the taller young man that had yelled ran a few paces and turned back to look at the figure. I listened closely as the hooded figure snickered and walked toward the frightened boy. "Are you scared?" I thought I heard him say. "Come on, where are you going?" He giggled under his breath. "I'll show you something. I'm going to get you." The tall kid had quickly made his way back to his car. He placed one hand on the car and the other on his forehead. I could hear better now. He said, "No, no, 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 not now, please, not now." He seemed to be talking to himself, not to the hooded figure that came closer. He struggled inward and suddenly jerked his sweatshirt off over his head, then slammed his fist down a few times on the top of his car. "Not now." He paused for a second or two and looked up. His demeanor had changed. He looked different. His outer shirt and glasses were gone. An eerie metamorphosis seemed to have occurred. He acted like a different person. He had a wife-beater tank top on, and he didn't look nerdy at all. The glow from the streetlights bathed his arms in a light that accentuated muscular arms and a powerful chest over a thin waist. He wasn't huge, but definitely appeared in great shape. He opened the back door of his car and pulled out a baseball bat. He turned to face the hooded man that had been slowly creeping towards him. The hooded man froze and was suddenly taken aback. The lean, muscular man held the bat in his right hand about a foot up from the handle end and slapped the fat, heavy end in his left palm, making a loud whack sound. I heard him say, "So, you want to play games, huh?" His voice was low and forceful. "Well, come on then. Let's play." "Let's play" was louder, and he spewed it angrily between his teeth. He took one step, then another quick one, and he began to chase the hooded man figure who wasted no time in turning and bolting for the forest. As they ran away, I decided I had enough rest. I got into the driver's seat, starting up the car and getting the heck out of there. I wanted to call someone, like the most nearby police, but what would I say? I think I'll just get a room next time. The Haunted School, from Edgar Zayas. This happened around late summer to early fall of 2015, I believe. It's been a while, so I'm not 100% sure of the date. But at the time, I had a group of friends and acquaintances that were interested in the paranormal, as much as I've been since I was a kid, due to experiences I've had all my life. One night we were all hanging out together, and one of the group, I'll call him Jay, started telling the tale of a school near Lenoir, North Carolina, a town not too far from where we were at the time, that had been an all-African American children's school back when segregation was still a thing in the early 1900s. I have in the following years not been able to find any proof of this story, so I can't be sure how factual it is. I will admit I may have some of the dates he gave in the story wrong due to how long ago it was. Anyway, he told us that back in the 1920s, as the legend goes, the Klan came to this school while it was in session and proceeded to lock all the doors with the children and teachers inside, setting fire to the school. Everyone was lost. A few years later, a new school was rebuilt on the site of the fire, and then after several years of operation, the school became too small and was closed after a new larger school was built a few miles away. He then explained that while the new school was in operation, there were several reports by not only students, but also from teachers and other staff members of odd paranormal activity. Supposedly, the later in the day it was, the more activity there was. So we decided to go to the school and investigate the school and see if any of the stories were true. We drove out using one car, and fitting all 7 of us in it was a sight to see. 3 up front, 4 in the back, in a mid-sized sedan. It was an interesting 30-minute drive, but once we arrived, and pretty much fell out of the car, we took in our surroundings. We had parked on a little pull-off on the opposite side of the road from the school. There was a chain running across the entrance of the gravel parking lot of the school, which is why we didn't park in the lot. I looked around and saw that the school was broken up into 4 separate buildings. The main 3 were set on a graded hill, staggered down with a set of steps running behind the 3 to connect them. The middle of the 3 was where the bathrooms and lockers were. The upper and lower levels were where the classrooms were. There was a larger back building that was newer than the rest, and was the gymnasium. It had been built after the rest of the 3 buildings had been rebuilt after the fire. There were also concrete paths that ran alongside each of the buildings, before the start of the retaining walls that allowed the grade between each layer of the school. We decided to go to the upper building first. We walked up the stairs in the back and entered the building at the top level. Now let me explain that the doors to this building were at least 7 to 7.5 feet tall. They were red and metal. One of the doors had fallen off its hinges and lay in the dirt at an angle. We proceeded into the hallway of the building, and we had to be very careful as the floor was rotting and falling in several places. We could see down into the exposed dirt of the ground several feet below. Debris lay scattered all over the floor. We made our way to the far end of the hallway, and we entered an old classroom on the left of the hall. As we looked around at the ruined room, we noticed that the windows that were almost all the way to the ceiling were starting to fog up for some reason. Really, to this day, I do not believe that our breath was responsible for this. Then, one of the members of our group pointed out that there was something outside the window that looked out of place. We all started to look toward the windows, and as we watched, a small child-sized handprint began to appear in the condensation at the top of the windows, which were at least 6.5 feet off the floor level. At this point, Jay mentioned that the upper building was where the original school stood that had been used as a death trap for the children and teachers back in the 20s. We were all shocked, and some of us were flat out freaked out by this. We decided to make our way back down the hall to see if anything outside the windows could have possibly made these marks. We exited the room, and before we made it more than a few feet back down the hall, we all stopped dead in our tracks, because at the end of the hall that had the only exit to the building, we saw a shadow figure that was standing just outside the doorway of the building. Now, the reason I know it was outside the building and not inside is because this figure had to lean down to its left just to be able to look in the doorway. The doorway was about 7 feet tall. The shadow blocked out the light from the outside as it did. The shadow man had to have been over 8 feet tall. It was skinny, not Slender Man type of skinny, but a normal fit man's build of kind of skinny. Not bulky or muscular, but fit. We ducked into the next room, which was on our left, on the opposite side of the hall from where the classroom we had just visited was, and it was just a storeroom full of school desks with attached chairs. We waited a few minutes. Then myself and another of our group, G, decided to look and see if the coast was clear. We walked back out into the hall and looked towards the doorway. Nothing was there. We told the rest of the group. They followed us as we slowly made our way to the end of the hall, skipping the rest of the rooms in the building, as we were done with this place. When we finally made it to the end of the hall, I volunteered to be the first to walk out the door to see if the coast was clear. We then made our way back down the stairs to the second level. Looking back at the upper building, we noticed that about halfway down the building, there looked to be a doorway with a cover over it, with thin pillars holding it up. Right outside the door, under the covering, stood what looked to be another figure, probably around 6 feet tall, that was cloaked in a black robe. I was staring at this figure, trying to figure out what I'm seeing. A couple members of the group started freaking out again, but I'm determined to find out what it was. So I began to walk down the path on the second level towards the figure. This path was on the middle level, so there was at least a 20-foot or more distance between the closest part of the path to the upper building. When I was about 50 feet from the figure, it just faded out of existence. All 7 of us saw it fade out. We regrouped at my location after a few moments, and determined that we had all seen it vanish, as we were all looking right at it the whole time. I have to admit, I was even starting to become unnerved at this point, because this was the most paranormal activity I'd been witness to in one place at one time. But we all decided after a while to continue our investigation. We then went down and entered the middle building from the front. As we enter, we see rows of lockers on both sides of the hall. We find that on the left side of the building was the auditorium. A lot of the floor had collapsed in, and we were able to find a path over to the stage. We found a set of jacks and a ball lying on the edge of the stage. Kind of odd, but we also found a few other odds and ends lying around, but nothing out of the ordinary, other than the jacks. After we made our way back out of the auditorium and back into the hall, We made our way down the hallway, checking out each room, which were mostly bathrooms or shower rooms for the students, and nothing abnormal happened until we reached the end of the hallway. We began to hear something like running down the hallway towards us from the opposite end. I turned to look back as I exited the building, and in the shadows, I see what looks to be the silhouette of a werewolf running on all fours towards us. This creature was in the shadows, and any time it reached the areas of the hallway where moonlight was shining in, it would reset, as in it would disappear and reappear instantaneously back at the far end of the hallway, still running at us. That was it for me. I told everyone else that we needed to go now. I rushed past most of the group, who seemed to be all staring wide-eyed down the hall. I started back down the stairs towards ground level, but not even halfway down in the gymnasium, we heard the sound of sneakers squeaking, as if a basketball game was being played inside. We all stopped halfway down and listened. Slowly we crept down the stairs towards the closed double doors of the gym, and as we made it to the bottom step that was ground level, the basketball game noises stopped. For a couple of seconds, there was total silence inside the gym until the sound of several, as in 20 or more, people running right at the doors to the gym echoed through the building. G and I slammed ourselves against the doors in an attempt to hold them shut against the oncoming footsteps. We yelled and urged the rest of the group to run on ahead and get out of the way. As the last couple of people ran past us, the running footsteps hit the doors, almost knocking myself and G to the ground. We held our positions, holding the doors shut, as whatever was inside the gym proceeded to slam the door repeatedly for what seemed like minutes, but it must have been 10 to 15 seconds. Then it all stopped. Silence. G and I looked at each other, and without a word we both jumped back away from the doors, waiting for something or someone to come rushing through. But there was nothing. The rest of the group had stopped about 20 to 25 feet down the gravel path back to the parking lot, and were watching intently as we slowly backed away from the doors and finally turned to walk back over to join them. Back with the group, I noticed that the two girls were looking off towards the chained-off field on the other side of the parking lot from the school, but they were looking back down past the far side of the gym in the field. I glanced back and only saw what looked to be an old mechanical pump for a well. I looked back at them and asked what they were looking at. One of them, JS, said, "Don't you see her?" I glanced back and didn't see anything. I asked her, "Who?" She broke her gaze and looked at me. She said, "The little girl in the dress." Then she looked back towards the field. I told her no, I didn't see anything, but we needed to go. So G and I started to usher the rest back towards the car. And as I was the last to cross back over the chain blocking the entrance, I turned back to seal off any spirits from following us from the property. But as I looked one last time towards the field where the pump was, standing right next to it was what looked to be about a 7 to 9-year-old girl in a white and blue 1940s-era dress, facing away from me, looking towards the woods beyond. Needless to say, I did what I had to do to seal the spirits from following us, and I bolted back to the car, being the last to pile in the back. Then we got out of there as quickly as we could. As we drove back to the house, we compared notes, and out of everything I recounted in the story, at least 5 of the 7 of us all saw the same thing and validated each other's accounts. The few occasions that any one of us didn't agree to the rest is when that person had been in the back of the group or had not left the room as we exited prior to the experience, so they had missed the sighting. I can say that I've been to several haunted locations, and I've lived in several haunted houses, including a demonic haunting, and even there, I've never seen so much paranormal activity in one place in such a short amount of time as I did at this school. We were there for less than half an hour, and it still ranks as the #1 most active haunted location I've been to this day. Unexpected occurrence from Candy Dreams. As the sun glared down on my pale skin, I suddenly was aware that another coat of SPF 50 sunscreen was undoubtedly required to continue exposing myself to the unforgiving rays reflecting through the windows and landing on me, seemingly directed at me intentionally. I was a 29-year-old lady at this point, so the regrettable memories of previous occasions stampeded to my thoughts, causing me to remember multiple times where I neglected to acknowledge the mighty sun's ability to hastily penetrate my skin, leaving its awful sensation mimicking molten magma pulsating throughout my flesh. I was driving in a sketchy, run-down part of the city to meet up with a close personal friend, Damien, whom I'd known for over a decade, and escort him to his residence so he could prepare to go on a date with our friend Bree. As I pulled up to the location he sent me to pick him up from, before I could completely stop the truck from moving, I was alarmed to see he was running faster than I'd ever seen him run, armed with a new .233 rifle he'd acquired only several days before. He desperately jumped into the back of the truck, demanding I go, and hurry. I punched the gas, purposefully running the stop sign at the end of the block, and hightailed it to his place without being allowed to question Damien about the cause of his anxiety. I drove as quickly as I could, nearly crashing several times on the way there. Once we made it to his house, he was standing up, looking from side to side through the scope attached to his weapon, yelling, "Go inside, quickly! I've got you covered." I ran clumsily into his house, sighing with relief once I was able to drop to the sofa, feeling much safer. Until he burst through the door, jumping from window to window, loudly stating, "They're coming to kill me! They're coming to kill me!" I was back on edge, inquiring, "Who? What? Why?" He was obviously not in his normal mood, and was acting bizarre with every action he was taking. He described to me an unbelievable scenario in which, supposedly, about 5 people were angry at him for talking trash, so they were texting him over and over, threatening to kill him and his family and anyone close to him. I attempted to get him to be rational, as the idea anyone would leave so much evidence before committing a crime that's punishable by potentially death is absurd, but he was ignoring my every word. His untrained handling of the weapon was blatantly unsafe. So after only a few minutes, I decided it was not wise to prolong this visit. I declared, "I'm gonna get out of here." And at that very same moment, he decided to flip his gun around. He unintentionally had it directed at me. As I attempted to stand up from the sofa, I crumpled to the floor, incapable of moving my body. I somehow observed myself lying on the floor. I saw Damien attempting to place a call on his phone several times, but dropping it from his shaky hands over and over, until he was finally gripping the device firmly enough to punch the keys properly. I was not feeling any emotion at the moment, simply observing the scene playing out in front of me, kind of like watching a dream. Then I heard it, Damien crying into the phone, "Someone's been shot, just get here, now!" I instantly thought, I've been shot. I don't have time to be dead. My mother's in hospice. My daughter has a broken arm. I don't have time to die. And suddenly, I felt myself going back inside my body. I hadn't realized until those words were uttered that I'd been having an out-of-body experience. It didn't occur to me that my life was in danger. As soon as I was back in my body, though, I was engulfed in unbearable pain throughout my thigh and stomach regions. Damien begged me, Candy, please tell me you're alive." But I felt if I used any energy to speak, that I would pass out, and the idea of going unconscious was too frightening to me. So I just lay there, focusing all my energy on taking deep, slow breaths, so that I wouldn't panic and hyperventilate. It seemed as though the ambulance took hours to drive to the house, but the police report I obtained much later stated it was about 10 minutes from the dispatch that they had arrived. I was unable to assist in getting myself onto the gurney, so the medical assistants had to lift me up, then push my legs down and torso up, so they could view the gunshot wound. I had a hole which entered into my thigh, but because it went through my Samsung tablet before it entered my body, the glass apparently does strange things to bullet paths, not to mention at that moment, I had been changing positions from sitting to standing, so due to the angle of my body and the bullet's path changing from the tablet glass, it exited from my abdomen in the front, right above my pelvis area, leaving what looked to be burnt flesh across my stomach and through my shirt. I was taken to the hospital and signed something before being put under for emergency surgery. When I came to, I found out somehow no bones were broken, and even though the bullet was a hairline away from my artery in my leg, it didn't rupture it, or else I would have bled out before assistance arrived, as Damien was too scared to touch me to even see for himself where the bullet had entered. He was placed in jail for a few days, before I was taken off the medication long enough to contact police and inform them it was an accidental shooting. I was unsurprised to find out the people coming to kill Damien never did follow up on their threats. It was the scariest event in my life, thinking I was going to die and leave my mother to be placed in a nursing home. But I was able to get a wound vac, and the awesome nurses encouraged me to stay active, making it possible for me to return home in only 6 days to attend to my mother's needs. I did have to temporarily use a walker. It's been several years, but I still have fragments of bullets, fabric from my jeans, pieces of glass, and bits of computer board from the tablet working their way out of my body. The doctors said it would cause too much tissue damage to remove every small thing from my body, so it was best to allow my body to eject them itself over time. Damien sold his gun as quickly as he could, and since has participated in gun safety courses to be more knowledgeable whilst handling weapons, and he even took some therapy to be able to reduce anxiety in tense situations in the future, so that this never happens again. Our friend Bree had been intelligent enough not to come over the day I was shot, due to Damien acting erratic and unstable, and they never did decide to reschedule. I hope more people participate in gun safety classes in the future to possibly prevent such accidents from occurring, as well as gun owners having their weapons periodically inspected for proper functioning to ensure that the guns only work when the trigger is pulled. Speaking of which, the NRA website has lists for recalled weapons by a manufacturer, in case you want to be extra safe. How I Met a Demon, from Jennifer Marzulli. Yes, I actually met a demon, and it was the most frightening experience of my life. This wasn't a dream, nor an astral experience. It was real life. For context, the university I was attending at the time had a prayer room that you can go to and pray if you're religious. It's like a quiet room, or a little designated vacancy where anyone can either pray, have a moment of silence, meditate and unwind, or just get away from the stress of the day and relax. I'm the type of person who keeps to themselves. I'm not really critical or judgmental about people. I don't really look too far into what other people are doing around me. In other words, I just mind my own business. I'm not superstitious whatsoever. I'm more logic-oriented, and I like to think there's a proper reason behind everything. But that's just the way I am. Just a little something about me that'll have more bearing throughout the story. Now, I don't typically have a good memory of things, but on this day I remember it all too well, as if it was yesterday. It's super vivid in my mind, and every time I think about it, I get chills down my spine, because what took place in this particular moment was so frightening that it's literally seared into my brain for the rest of my life. Though I remember every detail as clear as crystal, it's the feeling of indescribable terror that sticks out to me more than anything else. It was my first year at uni, and that day I wanted to find out where the prayer room was located. I asked another student where the prayer room was, and she told me it was on the 3rd floor down at the end of the hall to the right. When I discovered the area, it had a really nice, inviting atmosphere. There were no chairs or tables. It was a neatly carpeted little room that was nice and quiet. Now, when the students go to the prayer room during the prayer periods, it was usually just a small number of people who would sit on the carpeted floor and do their prayers. Then they would leave. No one really hung around there for too long. As the story continues, it was about my 2nd week at uni. I'd gone to get a sandwich and a drink in the lunchroom, but it was so loud with the amount of other people chatting and making a ruckus. I didn't recognize anyone, and I didn't want to feel awkward sitting there by myself. Besides, I couldn't even hear myself think because it was so loud. So I decided to take my food with me to try to find the prayer room and get through some of my homework and some important paperwork over there. I left the lunchroom and made my way down the adjacent wing to the stairwell, and I descended through the first 2 floors as usual. But as I reached the 3rd floor, everything was super quiet. I was taken aback by the silence, and the entire segment was completely empty. There were no classrooms or anything in that area. It was completely and totally scarce. I quietly made my way down the hall, and there it was at the right, with a nice little door. Walking through, I looked around inquisitively. It was a very neat, quiet little room, with a beautiful rug and a nice little bookshelf. Mind you, this was between prayer periods, so no one would have been anywhere around the area at the time. I went in and sat down with my things and just took in the solemn stillness for a moment, appreciating the silence. After, let's say, around 5 minutes of sitting by myself, in walks this girl who looked like an average university student. She had very pale, light skin, but nothing particularly conspicuous about her. No reason for alarm, I took a brief notice of her entrance and continued with my paperwork. She sat down adjacent from where I was sitting. Because of how the room was structured and how small it was, that's not the first spot I would have chosen to sit if there was a person sitting where I was. I was more so expecting her to sit somewhere across from me, where there was more space, but nonetheless, I didn't really notice or care. After a few moments, she and I started to chat casually about normal things, like classes and particular studies and courses, things of that nature. But as we talked, she slowly yet subtly started moving closer and closer to me, eventually to the point where our knees were almost touching, sort of diagonally across. It was then that she asked me for help with a paper she was having trouble understanding. Having a generous heart, I said, "Sure, what do you need help with?" She showed me what it was she needed more clarity on, and as I explained it to her, that's when something ominous began to happen. It was just the two of us alone on the 3rd floor of this building in a small, quiet room, and I hadn't felt the least bit threatened by this rather skinny, pale, normal-looking girl who was about the same height as me. Neither had I gotten any odd vibes from her until this moment. It was literally the scariest and strangest thing ever. It's really hard to explain how this happened. Normally, while I'm trying to explain or talk about something to someone, I would expect some kind of feedback like a simple yeah or uh-huh type of gesture. But as I explained the paper to this girl, all I heard was silence. As I looked up from the paper just to see if she understood me or was confused about anything I was saying, the expression on her face was just utterly aloof. Her eyes pierced right through me into my soul. My first thought was that she must have had some sort of mental condition and just kind of zoned out. But that thought instantaneously disintegrated as I frantically addressed her while trying to sound as calm as I could be. After all, I was beginning to feel unsettled. I said to her, "Do you get it? Is everything okay?" There was absolutely no response from her whatsoever. She just sat there with a sort of half smile, gazing into me and not saying a word. Then her eyes shifted subtly in a way that caused her whole expression and demeanor to exude an aura of absolute pure evil. There are no words to describe it. Looking into her eyes, it was like I was looking into the depths of the underworld. This feeling of unadulterated terror began to encompass me as I was starting to freak out inside, like I was having an internal mental breakdown. I was completely frozen with shock and a fear I'd never known before. I couldn't even bring myself to move a muscle. Her eyes grew larger as this demonic scowl formed on her face. I knew that I needed to leave at once. My heart felt as if it was welling up into my throat, and tears began to fill my eyes from the amount of sheer terror I felt, though I didn't cry. However, I couldn't move because I was so scared, but I knew I had to leave. I knew that I was alone on the 3rd floor and that no one would be in the hall to buffer me from her diabolic fixation, which made my soul scream inside me, breaking me down all the more. I was shouting internally at myself to leave because I didn't know what would transpire next. She was saying something I couldn't make sense of, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away from her, trying desperately to will myself to move, and I was panicking. I'd never felt so alone in my entire life. The pure absolute dread and such primal sense of evil was so thick in the atmosphere. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. Then somehow, out of nowhere, she goes back to normal and nonchalantly tells me she's going to go use the restroom, as if nothing happened. She was back to her mundane, bubbly self. The girl then left the room. However, the feeling of sheer terror was still ever present, as I intuitively knew that this ordeal was not over. My gut was shouting, telling me this was my final chance to escape, because if I didn't get myself moving at once, what was to come within moments would be nothing short of devastating. In a rush of fierce desperation, I managed to burst out of my petrified condition. My heart sank as I noticed that a lot of my things were still out on the floor. I frantically began cramming my papers, my laptop, my food, and all my other belongings into my bag without order. I don't know exactly how long this took, but it felt as if the task was taking me forever to finish. The degree of imminent danger I felt was grave. I felt as if I was going to vomit, and my hands were trembling. Almost to the point of hysteria, I prayed the girl would not come back before I left that room. I was almost finished packing my things, and right as I was about to stand up, there she was, walking slowly towards me. My heart nearly stopped as I noticed her, and a thrill of impending doom surged through me as time itself seemed to stop completely in that very instant, like that moment you experience just before you think you'll meet your timely end within the next second. It was by far the most awful feeling I'd ever experienced in my entire life. I want to cry just remembering it. I experienced that dread as she was walking slowly towards me, still not saying a word whatsoever. She wore that hellish demonic scowl on her face again, like before, her eyes piercing through me. This time she was standing, which made her whole countenance astonishingly more terrifying than before. However, I also noticed she was now completely drenched from her head down to about her midsection with what I assumed to be water. I didn't understand this, but I had no time to analyze it. I didn't want her to see me so desperate and panicked. I tried to slow and steady my pace, hiding my trepidation as best I could, and at all costs trying to avoid eye contact with her, or else it could spell disaster. If I'd let myself slip up even a little bit, or lock onto her eyes for even an instant, it would have messed me up, and I would have fallen completely apart. Then I don't know what would have happened to me after that. By then, she was almost standing over me. With my utmost fortitude, I ignored her, including the water that was dripping all over me from her drenched frame as much as I could, and I finished packing my things. Finally, I was done, and I arose, hesitantly walking past her, expecting her to strike me down or tear me to pieces at any moment. I felt her ghastly presence behind me, and her gaze piercing into me as I drew closer to the door, but I didn't look back no matter what. These were the most painstaking and gut-wrenching moments of my life, and they seemed to drag on and on. I finally made it to the door and walked through, but the hallway seemed like it was 3 times longer than I remembered. It was such a long walk. I wanted to run so badly, but that would have given me away, and I didn't want her to see how afraid I was of her. So I just kept walking. I could feel her menacing glare behind me from afar as the distance between us extended more, and as I finally made it to the stairwell and through the door, I bolted like a gazelle. To this day, I don't know how I made it down those flights of stairs without tripping and landing on my face from the way I ran. I ran until I was finally around the other students in the hustle and bustle of the crowds, where I felt a little more safe. I just sat down somewhere in one of the main rooms, as my hands were still trembling from the ordeal. I was trying to process what happened. Although I felt much safer around the other students, I still didn't feel completely secure in my surroundings, so I kept walking. I wanted to walk all the way home where I felt completely safe and forget about what happened just moments ago. Somehow I feel like there was a higher power watching over me that day, protecting me, preventing that being or whatever it was from harming me and pursuing me on my way out. Because I just don't feel like I should have made it out of that situation. It was that feeling of absolute terror and dread that stood out to me more so than anything else that day. but her eyes I will never forget for as long as I live. They were so hellish and full of utter malice and horror. They were beyond frightening. There are no scary movies horrific enough to depict what I saw in that girl's eyes, nor the terror that I experienced then, for that matter. I don't even like to watch paranormal films because I believe that there's real evil out there in the ethers, and they can even take on the form of a physical person, which is so frightening to even think about. I attended that same university for 3 additional years, and I've never once seen that girl again. I even went back to that same prayer room many times, and I haven't seen her since. I wonder if she even went to that university. I wonder who she was, but I never saw her again. Something followed me home, from XO Lil Monster 77. This was hands down one of the scariest weeks of my life. I've heard a local ghost tale or legend a few times about the Devil Tree. Since my husband is into the paranormal as well, I told him of the legend. It goes, 2 girls were found by some fishermen near the tree. The fishermen found ropes still hanging from the tree. As they investigated, they realized the bodies had fallen from these ropes. They were victims of a serial killer from the 80s. Not to mention local Satanists were said to do rituals around the tree. All that combined freaked out the neighborhood. The county attempted to have the tree cut down. From chainsaws malfunctioning to the teeth falling from a handsaw to the crew tasked with taking it down getting into an accident while attempting to get another saw, it seemed there were forces at work that would not allow the tree to be cut down. Anyway, we thought we would check out that tree. I definitely believe in the paranormal, and my husband is more of a skeptic. He won't believe it until he experiences it himself. We get to the park, and the first thing we encounter is a wild bobcat chasing some prey. That should have told me to go back to the car, but nope, I had to go. To get to the tree, you have to follow along the canal until you get to a small opening, and from there you can see the tree through the brush. Note that this brush had not been around when the girls' bodies were discovered under the tree. During the walk down, I felt a little nervous because I've had unexpected experiences before, but I'd never sought out something paranormal like this. My husband, on the other hand, has been to Waverly Sanatorium, and the only thing he was worried about was an alligator coming up from the canal. We approach the opening. I take a deep breath, and we head over to the tree. Instantly, I felt even more nervous and kept looking in a spot behind the tree that was covered with vines. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be possible for someone to climb in there. I could see no one or nothing was there, but I just had a bad feeling. My husband walked around the tree, touched it, and convinced me to touch it. I ran my hand across it as gently as possible, and I said that I hope the girls are able to rest easy now. However, my husband decided to berate the tree, because he figured making it mad would cause it to react. I told him to knock it off and be respectful. He apologized, and we stood there for a moment, taking everything in. Now, the entire time we were being swarmed by mosquitoes. I almost left right away, because I tend to be a mosquito magnet, and it was almost impossible to bear. But suddenly, all at once, something in us snapped. My nervousness just vanished, and I felt eerily calm. The mosquitoes didn't bother me anymore, and I wanted to stay there forever. My husband went into a small rage, though. I could see it in his face. As I said at the beginning, there are bobcats and other wild animals in the woods, so it blew my mind when my husband just left me there all of a sudden. He was so full of hate and emotion that he walked right out without me. I just stood there for a moment, unable to get my body to follow. After maybe 30 seconds, I finally got my body to move, and I began to follow my husband. But something in me still didn't want to leave. Once I hit the trail that runs along the canal, the feeling was almost gone. We walked back to the car in silence. Once we got there, my husband apologized for leaving, but he just couldn't handle the feeling of hate anymore. Over the next week, every time I closed my eyes, I would see a dark female figure. I couldn't make out specific features, but I knew that it was not friendly. And I mean, it was every time I shut my eyes. I could go outside on the brightest day, close my eyes, and I'd see her. After about a week, our friends offered to cleanse my mind and spirit in an attempt to get her away from me. And it worked. But to this day, if I happen to be on the main road that you use to get there, I'll drive past the road as fast as I can safely do so, just to get away from there as quick as possible. At one point, my mother-in-law came down to visit. She stayed at a hotel a little far from us. I couldn't take off work, but my husband and our 2-year-old stayed with her while she was at the hotel. Well, while waiting for me to get off one day, she searched for nearby parks on the GPS, and it began to take them miles away to that darn park. There are so many playgrounds and parks around before then, but something tried to get them to go to that one. Once my husband realized where the GPS was taking them, he instantly told my mother-in-law not to go and to find somewhere else. She knows about what happened to us there, so she had no problem traveling a little farther to get away from there. Deadly Typhoon from Gurul. This story happened 12 years ago to my aunt and her daughters. Take note that the time this happened, she was still pregnant to her 4th and last child. Her first was 11, her second was 5, and her third was 8 months old. I'll tell this story in her perspective, so it's easier to tell. On September 23, 2009, there was news that a new typhoon had entered the Philippines. We encounter a lot of typhoon and storms. At the time, the news stated that this storm wasn't different from the others, so almost everyone ignored the news, like a passing, ordinary, rainy, windy day. Our house was located in Marikina City, only 3 streets away from Marikina River. My husband worked as a mechanic and went to work early that day, so I was the only one left to take care of my children. Although it was still morning, the sky was dark, and the rain began to pour outside. But that was to be expected due to the news of the typhoon the night before. However, as the hours passed by, my worries grew. The rain was strong and didn't let up one bit. Lynn! Lynn! I was startled to hear a knocking at our front door. Someone was calling my name during the rain, so I asked my Tintin to see who it was. "It's Manong Makring," she said, while the sound of knocking continued. Manong Makring was our neighbor inside the compound. "Go ahead and open the door for them," I told Tintin. I heard Tintin open the door as I was drying my hands with a towel. When I looked around, I almost jumped in surprise to see the water flowing inside the house from the front door. Our house was 4 stairs elevated from the ground outside, so I was shocked to see the unclear water creeping up the floor inside. Come in, I said to Manong Makring and her teenage son. "Sorry to disturb you. The flood is too high inside our house." Manong Makring's house was almost the same level from the ground outside, so to see that the flood reached us meant that the flood would have been hip deep for them. "Don't worry about that. Just come inside. Tintin, give them a towel, please." Tintin went to get what I asked. I closed the door right away to slow the water coming in. "The flood went up so fast," said Manong Makring. "All we could do was let everything float. We couldn't stay there, or we'd freeze to death." Not even 15 minutes went by, and the flood had risen to knee height in our house. All of us were cramped on the bamboo bed, just to prevent getting more wet than we already were. Since the water kept on rising, I asked Manong Makring's son to pull down the electric outlet to prevent any electrical accident, but we soon learned the appliances were turned off. The electric company probably turned off the power due to the floods. "Ma, the water is about to reach the window." All of us turned our heads to look outside. Lo and behold, the water was rising so fast that we'd have no place to go if the water overflowed from the window. I lifted my sleeping newborn baby while thinking what we should do. We were trapped in the house with no way to get out. We couldn't go outside the door because the water was too deep. Higher ground was the only option. So we had to go to the roof. The problem with that was there was no way of getting to the roof except outside. Soon enough, the water began flowing from outside the window. We were running out of time. What should we do? Manong Mokring wondered out loud. Manoy, who was Manong Mokring's son, poked his head outside the window and said, "I'll try to swim and reach the roof. I'll need a rope so I can pull you up there." Manong Mokring looked worried, but all we could do was follow through with Manoy's plan. "Auntie Lin, and lay down Days and your baby." I did as he said. I also covered them up with a raincoat to prevent them from getting too wet. Manoy began moving. He held on to the wood connecting their roof. I told his mother to follow him first so she could help guide and lift my daughters. She was hesitant, but she decided that would be best. My daughters were on the basin, literally floating on the water, when suddenly I heard the sound of a plastic bottle. An idea struck me. I stopped Manong Mokring from going out and handed her an empty plastic gallon bottle so she wouldn't sink down. I also gave Tintin a plastic bottle so she could float. While we crossed the flood, I noticed that there was a current, and it was very powerful. For a moment I worried about Tintin, who was holding on to a plastic gallon as a floater. "Tintin, hold tight to the rope. The water current is strong." She did as I said until Manoy pulled her up on the roof. We continued to cross from roof to another higher roof by just using wood we saw around. We also met with other people, and they tried to help us. All of us were dripping wet, even my newborn baby, but we had no other choice but to endure it. Night took over the sky. We were at a deep disadvantage, as the sky had been our only light. A group of men who had seen us told us to keep going, pointing out a direction of where we should go. In front of us was a 2-story house with a rooftop. All the while, the wind blew cold air that made us all tremble. Seeing my children go through all of this made my heart ache. Would this be the end of us, I wondered. No, I shouldn't think like that, I told myself. My children needed me now. Where was my husband? Was he safe? I had to focus and stand firm for my family. My thoughts were interrupted by the murmurs of the strangers helping us. I soon saw the house with a second floor. Some men nearby were trying to convince a woman to leave her house, to join us to go into a higher place. The woman said she wouldn't go, that they were better off there. My stomach turned when I saw that she was also holding a newborn baby in her arms. After some more convincing, the men gave up as the woman would not budge. The water continued to rise. In the dark sea of muddy water, I could hear the loud cries of a woman calling for help, followed by the cry of a baby. Even though people wanted to help her, it was too late now. They were too far out, and the path we used was now underwater. The crying lasted only for a few minutes. Eventually, it turned into a desperate wail. I hugged my daughters tightly, thinking that could have been us. I prayed silently. I was so desperate for the water to stop. The water reached ankle high, despite being on a 3-story home. The light post on the street had submerged in the flood. My eyes began to water. Others whimpered around us. Hours passed by, with all of us trembling every time the wind blew. Manong Mokring hugged her son Manoy, along with Tintin, trying to keep all of them warm. I held on to Days and my newborn baby. Eventually, the pouring rain stopped. It would come and go after that, but before long, the flood subsided, and the sun began to rise. Rescuers were going around, taking survivors to an evacuation center. We thought the horror ended there, but we were wrong. The mud on the road was so high, and the street was full of dead bodies, of people who had been trapped in their homes. We were indeed lucky to be able to survive that catastrophe. In the evacuation center, others told their stories about survival. We heard in the news that a couple of dams released water during the storm, which had caused the huge flood. Many lives were taken due to the lack of proper warning. There was still no news about my husband. He didn't have a cell phone, so we couldn't just call him. After a few days, we were able to make our only cell phone work. I told Tintin to message our relatives living in Quezon City. They must have been so worried about us. My sister, who had a car, told us that they would take us to their house rather than having us stay in that evacuation center. Manong Mokring's relative also took her out of the evacuation center too. Tintin and Days said that they would go to the restroom, so I told them to go ahead and go, but to come back right away when they were done. When they came back, they were in the arms of my husband, who looked disheveled. With our daughters in his arms, he ran towards me. He bawled his eyes out, not caring if there were people watching. I thought I lost all of you. I was ready to run into the flood just to find you. His voice and body trembled as his sob grew louder. If my coworker didn't stop me, telling me that you might be alive somewhere, I wouldn't have stopped from jumping in the water myself. I cried with them. Hush, we survived, that's all that matters now, I said, my voice cracking from the sobs. Later that night, my sister and her husband came to pick us up. They said they were barely able to get here, as almost all the roads were blocked. On our way out of Marikina City, more dead bodies lined up, as did the piles of cars, some of which were flipped upside down in one of the villages we passed by. Some of the most devastating news we heard was about the one mall beside the Marikina River. A lot of bodies were found on the ceiling of that particular mall. The people thought they could survive in there, but it ended up as their graveyard. There was news about missing people all over the place. It could have been us. We could have died, but we were lucky enough to be saved. We were lucky enough that we all made it out alive. The Thing I Invoked, from Lair of Ryle B. I'd like to start this story by saying I wasn't in the greatest headspace in the world on that night. I felt like everyone and everything around me was collapsing underneath my feet. This is what it's like living with ASD, ADHD, and just to add in as a chaser, depression. Living with these as a full-fledged adult is a marvel of an achievement in any sort. But that's not the reason I write this. You see, with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, I have a few quirks or tics. No, they're not as cool as My Hero Academia quirks. Rather, it's annoying. When I'm anxious or nervous, I tend to talk underneath my breath, in full sentences or just repeating a singular word. Anyway, it was on a Wednesday of late September of this year. Being a struggling young adult with trouble trying to function as an adult properly, I'm an active DoorDash driver. It helps pay the bills, it puts an extra few dollars in the billfold, and it drives me to places that are an eye-opener. I live in and around the southwest Pennsylvania region of the US of A. Here, there are seemingly only two seasons, winter and construction. Our state cryptid is called the squonk, a shaven guinea pig man thing that melts at the sight of its ugliness with its own tears. Cute, right? And we're swarmed with white-tailed deer, our state animal. I've heard urban tales and legends of the skinwalkers and wendigo far too many times. How it is taboo to speak their names, unless you want to draw their attention. How it's forbidden to whistle in the woods, as essentially it's a dinner bell ringing to them. How they can project hallucinations to disorient its unlucky victims. And scariest of all, how they can take the form of different things to prey upon those they stalk. I, unfortunately, broke one of these rules. While en route to one of the best DoorDash delivery spots, I made a few wrong turns, thinking, I don't need a GPS, right? Well, I got myself lost and wasting gas at a slow grinding rate, so I pulled up good old Google Maps and typed in my destination. It found me a route that took me to a wooded forest, a sketchy one at that. So sketchy, in fact, that Google didn't mention that the road it took me down was closed due to construction. I was furious with Google and spun around, trying to do it myself, and this is where my quirk kicked into maximum overdrive. Without thinking of the consequences, I started muttering under my breath as my car takes a beating from the rough terrain. Dang it, dang it, dang it, Skinwalker, 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 I hate this, I hate this. About 5 minutes of me muttering this, I found the right path and headed to the right route. Now what happened afterward? A minute after my tires touched asphalt, black clouds conjured around the entire area and throughout my delivery drive. I was getting suddenly irritable with everything and everyone. My phone was performing poorly for navigation throughout the trip, and gas was the worst of my concerns. My car is a 2004 Santa Fe, and it is a gas guzzler. I'm surprised that I have yet to be stranded on near empty. My brain in the meantime was also kicking my emotional butt. It was like I had a grudge with everyone in my life for their past wrongdoings, and I couldn't do anything about it. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs. I was furious with everyone over nothing, but it felt needed. Darkness struck. I called it in and closed my app. I made only about $40 that night. I noticed my gas gauge was near empty. I drove to the nearest gas station and tried to figure out something with DoorDash Fast Cash with my girlfriend over the phone. I do have an access card, meaning I get food stamps, so I walked in the gas station, bought some cold foods as I'm setting up my Fast Cash for DoorDash and attempting to grab gas. With DoorDash, you can't just walk out with your money and spend it. You have to wait until a payment cycle, which in my case is a Monday. As I'm texting my girlfriend, I try out the Fast Cash alternative, which deducts $1.99. But no dice. I was super enraged at that point, thinking to myself, screw this. If I break down, I might as well do it whilst trying to get back home. So the tedious travel began back to my humble abode in Charleroi, my eyes glued onto the road and my gas gauge simultaneously. I take my journey from the gas station towards Route 30, up until I get onto a road known as Clay Pike. My girlfriend has been on this road plenty of times, as have I, but she always had strange vibes about it, whilst driving on it at night. I never got to experience what she meant, not yet at least. As I'm cautiously watching the road and my gas gauge, my girlfriend is texting me about my recent mood swing. I used text-to-speech to talk to her, but I was so overwhelmed by everything, I just didn't want to speak to her at that point. As she was trying to talk me down, I noticed something about the road I took. Usually there were a few cars ahead of me coming in my direction, or a few cars behind me, and I could have sworn there was a car behind me, but now the road was ghostly, as if unventured, never having been touched by a single person. I took a gander at my gas gauge when it flashed its low fuel light. This wasn't good in a situation like this. I lifted my eyes back on the road, and I saw what I thought at first was a buck striding along the road. Its eyes shined in my car's headlights as I almost struck it with my car. I parked my car, and that deer was still there, so I took a better look at him, or it. That's when it hit me. The eyes. They were still glowing yellow, as if my car was still shining upon them, even though my lights were perpendicular to this thing now. I also began to notice the body structure of the creature, hunched back with a giraffe-like neck, a blank slate where the mouth should have been, almost two symmetrical antlers on top of a micro head, thin, almost non-existent pale fur attiring this cryptid being, and to wrap it all in a nightmare of a creature, when I was about to speed off, I swear I saw it stand up and bend its arms the wrong way, like a human weightlifter, and it ran off on 2 legs. I was in utter shock of what my eyes had seen. Something unworldly decided to pay me a visit out of the blue. No, I remembered why it came. I had said its name through my quirk when I was lost. Then I was in adrenaline mode, needing to get back home ASAP. As the wild ride seemed more frightening and tense, everything looked twisted around the road. The evergreen trees looked as if they were growing taller and multiplying. My car's headlights provided bearable sight in this advanced darkness that engulfed my vehicle. Trying to look into my rearview mirrors provided no help at all, because all I saw was black and the occasional red brake lights. To make matters worse, and as if it were a sign of an otherworldly being's judgment, I soon came upon another roadblock. There was police tape draped upon my usual route back home, and the only other path to take from there was, ironically, Silent Hill Road. Not pulling up my GPS, I decided to go up the path and act like I knew where I'm off to. Only 10 minutes in, everything felt normal, and I felt like I was going in the right direction. Everything began looking familiar, from the landmarks to road signs and buildings passing by. It wasn't until I approached a large steel bridge that I felt gaslighted. A police car passed by with its area decaled on the door. West Newton Police Brigade. I parked my vehicle, pulled out my handy-dandy iPhone, and pulled up directions to my house. Half an hour away. I felt anxious. My gas was running lower than ever, so low that the needle was just teasing the E on the gauge. I took a deep breath, cracked my knuckles, and started driving back to the right way back home. Luckily, I made it just in time before my gas ran empty. After that, my girlfriend texted me. She said she had picked up gas for me to fill up just enough to grab gas at the closest station with the cheapest prices. After she helped me fill 2 gallons, I gave her a tight hug and apologized for my mood. I then told her about what I saw, as she is a believer of the paranormal and otherworldly things. She believed what I'd seen was part of the Fleshgate family. I believe whatever I saw was a Darian variant of the Skinwalker. The legends about calling out their names seems like what it sounds like, a myth. But know this, it is no hoax, fairy tale, or joke. For all my quirk has done in the heat of frustration and anxiety, it ended up attracting something malevolent and predatory. Juniper Woods Ranch, from Creepy Clown Girl. I was a 22-year-old girl living with my mom and stepdad in a small community known as Juniper Woods Ranch, which sat just outside of a small town in Arizona. Juniper Woods Ranch got its name from the juniper trees that enveloped the landscape of the community. This was 26 years ago, and at the time the roads were unpaved and rough in certain spots. And when it rained, it was extremely difficult to get in or out, because the creeks would flood. One day my friend Marilyn, who lived about 2 miles further up from where we lived, came over and asked me if I wanted to spend the weekend with her at her place, and if I wanted to go to Jerome with her the next day. I said, yeah, that sounds like fun. So I packed up some things and we got into her truck and drove off towards her house. Now, the further back you get into Juniper Woods, the more isolated and scarce the population becomes. And now you're surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. We got to her house and I settled in. We began to talk about different things that girls talk about. Later that evening, as she was cooking dinner, I decided I would go and explore around her property and just enjoy the quiet and beauty of my surroundings. The whole time I was outside, the air felt heavy, and I always felt as if something was watching me. I just felt completely uneasy. Later we ate dinner and she asked me if I wanted to watch a movie, and I said sure thing. So she asked me if I'd ever seen the movie The Howling, and I told her, yeah, I think once. She said, great, that's the movie we're watching. And I said, cool. She puts the movie on and she goes into the kitchen to make us some popcorn and something to drink. And when she returned, she started the movie. We started watching it, and I then remembered why I only watched it once. There's just something about The Howling that unnerves me and literally scares me to death. I don't know, maybe it's the way it invokes almost raw and pure fear inside of me, and that's why I won't watch it. Even to this day, I still have nightmares. After the movie was over, she said, we need to go to bed. We've got a long and busy day tomorrow. Okay, cool, I said. We bid goodnight to each other and she went off to her room. Her house had 4 large windows in her living room and didn't have curtains on them. So as I lay on the couch, the light from the moon that hung high that night illuminated almost the entire room. Feeling myself dozing off, I rolled over, got comfortable, and covered my head. I don't know how long I lay there before I heard this low guttural growl and heavy breathing. I think to myself, okay, you just watched a horror film. and your mind is playing tricks on you, and I need to stop scaring myself. As I tried to get comfortable, I heard the noise again. For whatever reason, I took my head out from under the covers, and I wished to God I hadn't. Standing not but a few feet away, there was something very large, hairy, and staring at me with human-like eyes and intense anger. I quickly threw the covers back over my head and lay there frozen, shaking and thinking that at any time this creature would attack and possibly kill me. Again, I don't know how long I lay there, but soon it seemed like it had moved closer to me, because its breathing and growling sounded closer, and I could feel its hot breath on me. The smell was overwhelming, nauseating, and I fought the urge to throw up. I took my head out from under the covers. It had moved closer, and I could just now make out what the creature looked like. This creature had to have been standing over 7 feet tall. It had a head and snout like a wolf, and hair like a wire brush. Its arms were semi-long, and it had razor-sharp claws. Its legs looked deformed. They didn't look like they should be able to hold that kind of weight or height. And its teeth, dear God, they were long and yellow, and its mouth was dripping with drool. I tried to let out a scream, but nothing would come out. Frozen and unable to move, I just lay there, staring at whatever the heck this thing was as it stared back at me. I don't know if it was from pure fear, but I must have passed out, because the next thing I knew, my friend Marilyn was waking me up, telling me that breakfast was ready. She stops and looks at me and goes, "Are you all right, hon? You don't look so good." I couldn't say anything, but what she asked me next terrified me just as much as the creature did. She asked me how I slept, and did I see anything scary last night. I don't know what it was, or if it was just my imagination. Was my friend Marilyn a skinwalker? I just don't know, because I never went back to stay the night at her house again. The Double Haunted Town, from Vivi the Fox. I used to live in a town in New London, Connecticut. This town was connected to a town called Groton, which was separated by a river, but connected to a bridge. A lot of naval families lived there. We lived in an old house that had a lot of history. It was around during the Revolutionary War era, when the town was set on fire by Benedict Arnold. I've always had a connection to the supernatural as it seemed drawn to my family. I've had many near-death experiences. I recall when I was 6 years old in that house, when my brother and I played with dolls in my room. My brother Joel was only 2 years younger than me. One day while playing, he saw a ladybug on the window. Joel was kind of a sadistic little kid, and he had a lot of issues. He gets up and smashes it on the window. I cried out to him, "Stop! It's bad luck to kill a ladybug, you know." He told me he didn't care. Then another one appeared, and he killed it too. I said, "Stop it," I told him in horror. Then 3 ladybugs appeared. He just kept killing them, but more and more would take their place. 14, then 30, then 50, until the entire window was covered with ladybugs. By then, I was so freaked out, I got up and tried to help him kill as many as we could. But the more we killed, the more appeared. We got so overwhelmed in terror, we ran to our dad and screamed for him to come. We tried to explain in between shallow breaths and sobbing what had happened, until finally we convinced him to look. To our confusion, there wasn't a single ladybug, not even the corpses we left squashed on the glass. He told us, "Stop making up stories. You're wasting my time, you knuckleheads." I felt both anger and putrid disgust. I knew what we saw was real. How dare he doubt us? As he turned away, I glanced at the empty window to find one little ladybug crossing the window as if to taunt us. Fast forward to when I was a teen, sometime after the whole neighborhood was knocked down to make an empty parking lot. It's important to mention here, every 4th of July, over the water we'd watch the fireworks on the New London side, back when I lived in that home. But many years had passed since then, and I had almost forgotten our humble little haunted house. Until a certain year when we decided to watch the fireworks on the Groton side across the bridge. On that side was a grassy hill where it was blocked off with a plastic orange tape fence. Part of the Revolutionary War mentioned before took place on this hill, and it was a very bloody battle. And yet here we were, about 200 people waiting for the fireworks to start, hundreds of years later. On the hill were 5 militia soldiers doing a 21-gun salute with old-fashioned muskets. It was so loud it'd make you flinch and your ears ring. Mom asked me to get water for our family, so I had to pass by them. I had a very sick, uneasy feeling in my stomach. I approached the hill where the men were. One of them broke the line and came inches from my face. He gave me a menacing stare as cold as death and slowly saluted me. It sent chills down my spine. I listened to the crowd, and 100 people were in awe over the men saying things like, "Look at those guys there," or "Wow, those guns are loud." But something was off about this, because 100 of the others were saying, "I don't see anything, I don't hear anything, what are you talking about?" When the realization sunk in, all 5 men vanished before our eyes, sending 100 people into shock. Not believing my own eyes, I asked the man in charge of the fireworks if there was some kind of reenactment today. He looked puzzled and said, "No, what are you talking about?" I backed away in horror, sprinting with the waters to the safety of my family. Then the fireworks had started. What I learned that day is not everyone can see ghosts, only certain people. I wouldn't go back there even if my life depended on it. I mean, 100 people can't be wrong, can they? Unknown Evil Entity, from Homer O'Clair's. What I'm about to share happened to my mom before I was born. According to her, I'm not supposed to be the eldest among my siblings. She was 4 months pregnant when she had a miscarriage. This story is about an unknown evil entity that took my unborn sibling from us. When my parents were newlyweds, they rented a house in Pasay, one of the cities here in the Philippines. It's a bungalow with 1 bedroom. It has a garden at the front and a laundry area at the back. My mom was usually alone during the day because my dad went to work as a cook at a restaurant and would often come home late at night. On the 3rd day, when the sun was about to set, she heard chirping noises, as if it was coming from hundreds of small birds. The sound was so loud, it was deafening. She looked outside the window and saw no signs of any birds. She opened the door and glanced at her surroundings, but she found nothing. Yet my mom could still hear the ear-splitting noise. She was so scared, she immediately bolted for the door. While she was trying to close the windows, she had trouble with a particular one where the hinges got stuck. She had no choice but to leave it open and ran to her room. She locked herself in their bedroom, patiently waiting for my dad. After a while, she noticed that the chirping sounds were inside the house, specifically in the living room. Let me say first that my dad is a bit different. Somehow he knows or feels the presence of these unseen entities. Simply put, he has a gift. Now, when he arrived, he also heard the loud chirping noise inside the house. It's as if it was coming from the walls and ceiling. Instead of getting afraid, he cursed and swore at it, even challenging it to show itself for a fight. Nothing showed up, and the noise slowly died down. After dinner that night, when my mom was about to use the bathroom, she instead saw blood. She then passed out, later waking up in the hospital. The doctor told them they had lost the baby. You might be thinking maybe the chirping sounds have nothing to do with what happened to my mom. Perhaps it was just pure coincidence. That's what I thought at first, until my mom said it happened again. A few months passed. My parents moved to a different house in Guadalupe, still part of Makati City. My mom was pregnant again, and in her 9th month, she heard the all-too-familiar sound. The chirping noise. It was still as deafening as before. The only difference this time was it was coming from a single bird. She quickly ran inside the bedroom and locked herself in without closing the windows. She sat on the bed praying, and at the same time, her hands were holding tightly on the rosary and the Bible. After a few minutes, something started to kick the bedroom door, causing it to rattle. My mom climbed on the bed with her back to the wall. She knew it wasn't human because she couldn't see any shadows. And the house door was locked, so no one could have gotten in. The kicking never stopped until it became more powerful, eventually breaking the door. My mom thought that was it. She was about to die. Instead, she saw nothing, and no one came in. When the chirping sound came back, it was now coming from under the bed. She mustered the courage to run and open the house door. She stayed at the neighbor's house until my dad came home. I was born a week later. My mom had a safe delivery, and they're glad I came out without any physical defects. My mom claims that the evil entity could not get to me because I was already 9 months old and I was too tightly attached to her womb. My mom would go on to deliver 4 more times, and they never encountered that entity again. My decomposing neighbor came to visit me. From Toromance. This is a terrifying recent real ghost story that happened to me in mid-July of 2021. I live in a very old town 63 kilometers west of Paris, in the north of France. On an average day here, life is so peaceful that the place could almost seem deserted. I moved to this town 3 years ago with my sister, and we live on the ground floor of a 2-floor house, so there's one neighbor above us. Upstairs, there lived a man in his 50s. He was very deranged, constantly calling out the neighbors nearby, having quarrels with them. He even came knocking on my door, asking if he could borrow my TV set. When I told him no, he got very angry and stopped talking to me. A couple of days before the incident that I want to talk about, something disturbing happened to me. I was sleeping, and all of a sudden I opened my eyes and I saw a figure right at my window. It was standing still and staring straight into my eyes. I was stunned for a moment, but then I recognized the silhouette of my neighbor who lives upstairs, standing there with his baseball cap and his frizzy gray hair. In the blink of an eye, I looked again, and he disappeared, as if nobody was there. I thought to myself, how rude is it of a person to come and just stare right into your window while you sleep? But I didn't do anything about it. I'm a person who avoids unnecessary quarrels. I thought maybe my neighbor wanted to ask for something. A couple of days passed, and I noticed a foul smell coming from the drain, sometimes in the kitchen. From time to time, the strong stench was coming in waves, with the wind through the window, but the source was unknown. I keep my house and all my drains very clean, so there was no obvious source of the stench. Day after day, I noticed that big flesh flies were coming inside our house through the window. My sister and I brushed it off, as it was the time of the big summer heat, and the flies could be just natural phenomenon. Nevertheless, the flies just multiplied. Every time I came home from work, I saw more and more flesh flies in my house. One evening, while I was watching something on the TV, I suddenly noticed a commotion outside. All my neighbors were outside too, in a state of confusion and disturbance, but they remained quiet. There was a huge police van and a couple of regular police cars. My whole street was blocked off by policemen. It was the special police for crime and murder investigation. When I went outside and asked an officer what happened, he explained that there was a deceased person's body found upstairs on the 2nd floor above my apartment. The found body belonged to a man in his 50s, the police reported, and it had been decomposing for several months. I was shocked that just above my apartment, there was a decomposing body and no one even knew. The police officer continued, Currently, we're investigating the case to find the reason of the person's death. We'll need more time, but you can go home and sleep in peace tonight. We're on patrol just in case." The police called in a specialized medical team, and they were proceeding the investigations during the whole night until morning. I heard them moving heavy objects upstairs. The big van was for the transportation of some of the deceased person's belongings. When I recall that my neighbor came to look at my window, I remember this was just a week ago. But the police had said that the neighbor had been dead for several entire months. Chills ran down my spine whenever I think about this again. Now I understand that the apparition at my window was not a living person. It was my neighbor's ghost. My neighbor's spirit was not in peace and wanted to alarm everyone, telling people to put his body to rest. Ever since this incident, I see no more apparitions at my window. The flies disappeared immediately after the police and the medical team took care of the case upstairs, and with it, the foul stench disappeared. Escaping the Woods, from Camenon 123. It was the summer of 2012 in Cavan, Ireland. I was playing at my friend Oscar's house with two other friends, Adam and Kin. Oscar's older sister, Emma, also had her friend Sarah over with her. Oscar and Emma's house was on a small row of 3 houses. Behind the houses was a large field, and behind the field was a huge forest. For weeks, myself, Oscar, Adam, and Kin all discussed venturing into the forest. Oscar said he heard noises from the forest at night and thought it would be an amazing adventure. We agreed to go in and planned everything. We brought food, water, and a BB gun. We asked the girls to come, and they agreed, and so the adventure began. The walk across the field was exciting. We were all discussing what we'd find in the forest and what we'd get up to. We finally reached the edge of the forest, the trees towering over us. There was a small ravine at the edge of the woods, with a little stream running through the ravine. We couldn't find a way across as the forest was at a higher elevation than the field, so jumping from the field was out of the question. Some of us were disappointed and were ready to turn back, but Oscar found a log long enough to cross the ravine. He did so and began trying to walk over it. One by one, we all walked across the log, with Adam being a little anxious before crossing. Before we knew it, we were inside the forest. It appeared to have been planted, with the trees in straight lines. This led to the forest having a very eerie vibe, as you could see in all directions as the forest got darker and darker. The area was also completely silent, as the forest floor was cushioned by a layer of moss all over. Any noise from a bird or a twig was amplified. We walked through the trees, admiring the scenery, and didn't think too much more of it. After a while, we made it to a clearing. It was a small circular field nestled in the forest. We knew if we entered the field, we might forget where our path was. The forest extended past the field, and we realized it was way bigger than we expected. So rather than continue walking to God knows where and potentially getting lost, we turned around and went back. The forest was already silent, but on the way back, it was somehow more silent than before, with not even the occasional bird chirping. The silence was deafening. We were walking back in groups of 2, myself and Ken at the front, Adam and Oscar in the middle, and Emma and Sarah at the back. Suddenly, we heard a noise from behind us echo through the forest. It sounded like a ghostly, howling laugh. This chilled us to the bone, and we began to pick up the pace. Out of nowhere, the 2 girls screamed and sprinted past us, Oscar and Adam following suit. I looked back with Ken and saw nothing, and in the confusion we ran after the group. As we ran, I could hear that same howling laughter behind us. It was more frequent and sounded like it was getting closer and closer. I looked over my shoulder and saw nothing on the ground, but up in the trees I saw something black move through the branches very quickly. I went from running for fun to running for my life as I sped up. I reached the ravine at the forest's edge and saw the two girls taking turns to cross the log bridge we made. Ken and I could not wait, and we sprinted before jumping across the ravine. After the girls crossed, Oscar came next, but the log snapped underneath him, and he fell into the stream below. Ken and I reached down and pulled him up. Adam had no way across and started panicking. We told him to run and jump, but he was afraid to fall in. As I was shouting at Adam, telling him to jump across, I finally saw what we were running from, and it haunts me to this day. It looked like a man, about 6 feet tall, and black, a black featureless face, black arms, black body, black legs, all black. He stood behind a tree and poked out from behind it, watching us. After seeing the man, I screamed at Adam to hurry. He eventually jumped and just made it across. We then sprinted across the field, the howling sounds fading away behind us. Upon returning to the house, everyone began to tell their version of events. We all heard the sounds of what we were running from, but only some of us actually saw our chaser. We all saw a different number of figures, and our descriptions of them were very different. Sarah and Emma saw a black featureless man and woman walking behind us at a distance before raising the alarm and running. Oscar only saw a woman sprinting towards us after the girl screamed and ran. I was the only one who saw movement in the trees above. Sarah and I were the only ones who saw the lone figure poking out from behind the tree. Adam and Ken saw nothing, but heard the noises. The completely different version of events was confusing us. After this ordeal, we agreed never to set foot in the forest again, and that agreement was set in stone when the forest was totally cut down a year later. Whatever was in that forest before, it is certainly no longer there. To this day, I still try to come up with a logical reason for the encounter, rather than blame the supernatural or paranormal, but I have never reached a conclusion. It Followed Us Home, from Ghost Hazard. I've been around the block a time or two. Enter the obligatory I'm completely mentally sound, never been high, etc., etc. But I've seen plenty of supernatural occurrences, starting early into my childhood. I could tell you about the staircase we found behind the wall while remodeling, or the ancient rotary phone that rings despite not even being plugged in, or even the day I got 7 missed calls from my stepfather, who had passed away a week prior in a car wreck. I've never questioned the supernatural. I'm the farthest person from being a skeptic you could ever meet. But despite my familiarity with these sort of events, there's one story that still makes my hair stand up on the back of my neck, makes me wonder just what the heck is out there in the places we can't see. To set the scene, I grew up in rural Arkansas. At the time, I was 7 or 8 years old. My parents and I lived in a double-wide trailer, about half an hour away from the closest large town. We had our own land, and I grew up very comfortable in the woods, night or day. We had this family tradition of sorts, where we'd all pile up into our truck, bring snacks and spotlights, and cruise the dirt back roads that scoured through the deep woods surrounding our house, looking for snakes to run over. We usually did this late at night, anywhere from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. We called it snake smashing. One night, we decided to go on one of these excursions. I was excited, unaware that I was going to see something that would change my perspective on the natural world forever. We all got in the truck and departed around 1 a.m. We knew these remote trails pretty well, and were just enjoying the peaceful solitude of the dark woods, listening to Pink Floyd and eating chips, me shooting at random things with my BB gun through the open windows. Once we arrived at a fork in the road, we realized we'd never been down the trail to the right, only the one to the left. We decided on a whim to see where this road led. Not very far down the road, we came across a gate, one of those metal tube swinging gates that have reflectors and stuff on them. There weren't any private property or no trespassing signs on it, so feeling bold, we got out and swung the gate open. After all, there was no lock on it. We continued down past the gate, the trees clearing to give way to a wide open space. It was an abandoned natural gas drilling site. This was also a somewhat familiar setting, as my father worked in the natural gas field at the time. We drove around for a bit, checking out the pipes and catwalks and such, left behind from the former operation. That's when we noticed something that seemed out of place. In a far corner of the clearing was a large black lump, with something white in front of it catching our headlights. We pulled closer, revealing that the large black lump was some kind of trash pile, seemingly burnt up. It was as if someone had demolished a small house or shed, then strewn a dumpster's worth of unwanted items on top of the rubble, then set it all ablaze. One thing stood out though, the white shape in front of it, one of those children's rocking horses, the kind you can sit on and hold the handlebars and rock back and forth on. This one looked very old and genuine, like it was handmade. The body was covered in an off-white material that appeared to be cotton-based. It had colored-on features like eyes in the saddle. The wooden rockers in the bottom were smooth and high quality. There was a mane made from these ropes of the same material as the body, almost resembling white dreadlocks. The oddest part about this scene was how the horse was placed. It was right at the forefront of the pile, turned broadways so we could see the details. There also wasn't a speck of grime on the thing. When we saw it, the mood kind of shifted. We thought it was kind of creepy, but ultimately went on with our night. And when we got tired, we turned around to head home. On the way back, we kept thinking that we heard deer or raccoons in the woods, but when we'd shine the spotlight into the trees, we couldn't see anything, not even any movement. Eventually, we'd make our way back home. At this point, it was around 3 a.m. We pulled up in the dark, approaching our driveway, when suddenly, the headlights hit something that made everyone in the truck go completely silent. I swear to the God I pray to every night, with both parents as my witnesses, the rocking horse was sitting in our driveway. It had not only followed us home, but beat us there. My dad had to get out and move it so that we could enter our driveway. As a reminder, we live in the middle of the woods. We don't know any of the neighbors personally, except that they were all old folk, and it was 3 a.m. This was no prank. This has no explanation. That thing followed us home through thick, dark, backcountry roads, where we passed no other vehicles. This experience really makes you wonder how this could have happened, and what force wanted this thing to appear in our driveway after seeing it miles away in the woods. It just makes me think about how we'll never be able to explain everything around us. Creepy Shadow Person from NoFace00. To begin, I'd like to say I have no specific religious beliefs. However, in my adult years, I've come to believe in energies. So I'm sure that what I came into contact with was a form of negative energy. I don't know if it followed me home that day, or if it had been living in my home lying in wait. My uncertainty is because this place always felt eerie at night, even before the occurrence. I know it's human nature to feel uneasy at night, but I've never experienced this feeling at home before or since. A little background on my home at the time. It was a townhouse complex. As far as I know, nobody died there. I don't believe any historical event happened there either. I do know that there were a few Native American tribes in the area before Europeans pushed them out. The people living in the other apartments never said anything about experiencing the same thing in their homes. I was about 14 years old at the time when it happened. I'd come home after hanging with friends. I did smoke some of the devil's lettuce while I was out, so when I got in, I went to my room and fell asleep. I woke up late in the night with an awful feeling. It was like I was startled awake. The room was dark, the house was silent, and looming above me was a smoky shadow figure. Once my eyes locked on it, I was frozen in terror. I literally couldn't move. It was as if some force was preventing me from doing so. I couldn't even cry out. I could see a face that looked vaguely obscured, showing only an outline of a face. It was surrounded by thick, inky smoke swirling around it. Then, after what felt like forever, staring at each other, it slowly started weaving towards me, mouth agape. It was as if it was trying to push its face through a barrier, stretching, weaving, mouth moving like it would help it propel forward. As I watched it creep towards me, I was internally panicking. I tried to swing at it with my right arm, but I couldn't. The only thing going through my head was, I have to hit it, or it will get me. This ran through my head repeatedly until I somehow managed to break whatever had frozen me in place. As soon as I swung my arm to hit it, the shadow creature vanished. I slapped the light on and sat there, shaken. I was confused as to what happened. Sometime later, I managed to go back to sleep with the lights on. Now, I wrote this situation off, as I wasn't completely sober. I didn't speak of it to anyone because it sounded crazy, so I reasoned with myself that I had hallucinated it. I accepted that explanation until my younger sister told me what she saw a couple of months after that. My sister is only younger than me by 1.5 years. She didn't smoke at the time either. I'm telling you this so you can understand why her experience can't be explained away so easily. We shared the room along with our much younger stepsister on weekends and holidays. When she was there, our stepdad would check on her sometimes. So when she awoke to find a dark figure standing a few feet away from her bed, she thought it was our stepdad, who was in the room. She noted the alarm clock read 12 a.m. After staring at it for a moment, she realized it was far too tall for it to be our stepdad. She found it strange that she couldn't make out any defining features, despite the weak light streaming through the window. It was just a dark mass taking the shape of a human form. My sister was scared, so she tried to pretend like she was sleeping still, while watching the shadow figure through slightly cracked eyes. Finally, it turned and walked over toward our stepsister's bed. It bent down to kneel on the foot of her bed, then proceeded to rock back and forth, slowly. She lay there, each minute feeling endless as her eyes flipped between the clock and shadow person, willing the thing to go away. After 10 minutes, it got up from the bed and walked out of the room, closing the door behind it. The next day, my sister asked our mom and stepdad whether they had been to our room the previous night. They replied they had been asleep the entire night. She then went to ask our younger brother, even though she knew it couldn't be him. He was smaller than us at that age, and the figure she saw was clearly taller than our stepdad. No one in the household had ever sleptwalked, and nobody had reason to lie about it. So when my sister told me her account after what I experienced, it creeped me out. I exchanged my encounter with her, and the whole thing left us feeling disturbed. Sleep paralysis or a ghost, from Red Star Eyes. As a child growing up, my little sister and I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house. It was a large 2-story with about 6 bedrooms between the stories. She and my uncle swore up and down that the previous owner was a criminal who stashed a large sum of money somewhere on the premises, and then shortly after, passed away, but wasn't discovered to have died for some time thereafter. As such, they all claimed that the house was haunted, as the man stalked around looking for his hidden money. Add to this the fact that my grandmother was a practicing witch who had an alcoholic, abusive husband for decades. At one point, she decided, in her own words, to call up all the demons of the underworld to punish him for the rest of his days. May they be short and miserable. Then she had a boyfriend who later died working next door by drowning in a tank of chemicals. With all that, you've got a recipe for a house that was very creepy to stay in. This is my most vivid memory of the place. I was probably about 9 years old. We were staying with my grandma. My room was at the head of the stairs. In fact, the door directly faced them, so you could walk straight up and into my room without stopping. The stairs and floor were very creaky, so it was impossible to step without making noise. When we were all there, we'd have to share beds, so I'd bunk down with my uncle. One night, I heard someone walking heavily downstairs. I'm not sure what time it was, just that it was dark outside. I think it sounded like it came from the basement stairs, but that could be 30 years fogging my memory. I know that I heard the steps coming up the stairs, not in a hurry, just plodding along, slowly, methodically, not trying to keep quiet either. As I lay there, the footsteps crested the top and stopped right in front of my door. There was silence for what felt like an hour. Then the doorknob rattled and turned. The door opened very slowly. I'm not gonna lie, it seemed like whoever was opening it was trying to make it creak as much and as long as possible. At this point, my eyes were clenched shut, so tight they hurt. Then my heart felt as if it stopped because this person stepped into my room and began walking around in a shuffling gait. When they reached the window, which had no curtain, so why bother? It overlooked a huge backyard and no one else was high enough to be able to see in. All was silent again. I strained my ears to listen for anything. I could not hear this person's breathing. Oddly enough, I couldn't hear my uncle breathing either. I don't recall hearing any sounds at the time. I was able to move, but I didn't want to. I was terrified who or whatever was standing there by the window would notice. Then I heard it do what I assume was turn around. It started shuffling again. This time, it went right up to my bed and stopped. I swear that I felt a presence looming over me, looking at me. I finally got the courage to crack open one eye toward my uncle, who was between me and it. I was against the wall. He was still there but seemed deathly still and pale. I wanted to look further up and see if the whatever it was still there, but I also didn't want to, because I was afraid to see it. Eventually, I heard it shuffle back out of the room, then back down the stairs, and when it reached downstairs, it again stopped moving. I sat up slowly and finally looked around. My door was indeed open. My uncle still looked really pale. After waiting a few more minutes, listening, I reached over and nudged him. He was stiff and cold to the touch. I panicked and shook him hard. He didn't budge or stir. I don't think I even remember noticing him breathe. I really was sure he died. I began to cry silently. I didn't want that thing downstairs to hear me. I hugged him and lay there until I finally fell asleep. I woke up in the morning to the usual sounds of everyone up and about, all 8 of them, and my uncle was gone. I got up and looked at the window, and it was bright and sunny out. As I walked out of my room and downstairs, I saw him sitting in the living room, cigarette in one hand, Dr. Pepper in the other, his usual huge grin on his face. "Well, good morning," he said in his typical way too loud manner. "Was wondering when you'd get up. Weird night, huh? At one point I woke up and you were even sleeping with one leg crossed over the other, like you were in a chair." A few months later, when we were back visiting again, I asked him about that night and if he had heard anything. He just laughed and said, "Nope, but then I'm so used to old Albert that he doesn't bother me anymore. One day he'll find that money, I guess, or we will." No one in my family other than me experienced anything that night. I didn't know anything about sleep paralysis back then either. Even today, I'm not sure if it was that or not, considering all the other weirdness I've experienced in that house over the years. A Halloween Haunting, from Rai Kazuji. My birthday's on Halloween. As such, my friends and I typically spend it trying to find evidence of something spooky, whether that leads us to exploring a graveyard at midnight, breaking into an abandoned asylum, or similar adventures. But on the night of my 18th birthday, we all got more than we bargained for. Our main group back then was comprised of myself, my cousin Leon, and my best friends JB, Parker, and Murph. We'd spend practically every weekend in my father's basement, watching sports, engrossed in video games, or playing music, as we were so sure our little high school band would get picked up if we played in enough bars. It didn't, of course, but just being able to hang out and play as loud as we wanted to was more than enough for us. You see, my father lived in the middle of nowhere, on a 10-mile stretch of road, with all of 2 other neighbors on either end. His house was dead center at the 5-mile mark. No matter how boisterous our little parties got, there was no one remotely near enough to complain. According to my father, he got a sweet deal on the house and property, about 10 acres worth, because the previous owner had gruesomely murdered his whole family and then hung himself in the shed some 20 years back. My dad, ever the bargain hunter, would never let such a deal get away, and I personally relished being so close to anywhere likely to elicit paranormal happenings. On top of that, a set of train tracks ran past our yard and was said to lead to an old Native American burial ground within a natural maze of trees. For years, Leon and I tried in vain to coerce the group to check out the burial ground to no avail, as JB was extremely superstitious and Murph was rather timid. Even walking through cemeteries, JB would rarely get out of the car, and Murph would rush back to join him the second he heard any noise. When I turned 18, my cousin and I joked about how that night just had to be the night something would finally happen. With so many alleged supernatural factors practically in my backyard, we resolved to get our group back to the burial grounds, no matter what. We posed this idea the second our other friends arrived, with the intent to eventually pester them into submission. Parker, the rational one of the group, easily agreed, stating that there wouldn't actually be anything back there. JB and Murph continued to stall, saying first they'd go after we had our pizza, then after a few drinks, then after we'd made a fire. The latter option proved to be the most difficult, as despite going weeks without rain, a slight drizzle began right as we attempted to start the fire. Leon and I, both Eagle Scouts, tried our best to get a light, but eventually we gave up, turning to our friends with a shrug. JB sighed, looked at Murph, and said, "Fine, we can go see your stupid tree maze." Delighted, Leon and I both bolted to the tracks, calling out to my father that we'd be back later. After walking for a few minutes, my phone rang. It was my father, annoyed that we'd left with the fire burning unattended. "What? No, Dad, we couldn't even get a spark tonight," I said.
"Well, whatever you did, it must have worked. Something in it's burning red hot,"
he replied. I turned around to look at the backyard, and I could clearly make out a decently sized blaze, literally colored blood red, as in the actual red fire they use in special effects by burning lithium chloride. But all we had used for kindling had been some old cardboard boxes and dead branches. I apologized to my father, who said not to worry about it as he'd watched the flame and to just be careful back in the woods. I hung up and looked at my cousin, who was closest to me and had heard the conversation. Didn't we set that fire up in the back where the patch of dirt was?" he asked, to which I nodded. "And isn't that where the shed used to be before your dad knocked it down? Where that dude hung himself?" he asked, nervously. "Yeah, but don't say anything, or JB will never come over to my house again," I replied, chuckling to ease the tension. Leon nodded, but continued to give me a wide-eyed expression as we kept walking down the tracks. A half hour passed, and we reached the stretch of land people claimed to be the burial ground. There was indeed a natural maze in the middle of a field, with tunnels weaving in and out of the trees, and a canopy that blocked out all light. Brandishing our flashlights, we walked into the maze, having to almost drag JB and Murph along with us. Sadly, nothing noteworthy happened as we explored, save for me turning off my flashlight and doubling back behind my friends to jump out and scare them. Parker laughed, Leon chastised me, Murph punched me on the arm, and JB cussed around half a dozen times. We continued into the center of the maze and discovered a clearing. In the middle of the clearing stood a large tree that had clearly made up the bulk of the canopy, but at some point it must have been struck by lightning, as it was charred and split right down the middle. Oddly enough, a large branch had somehow fallen right between the wedge of the trunk and gotten stuck near the base, giving the tree a resemblance to an inverse cross. The moonlight shined down onto the tree from the gap in the branches above, casting ominous shadows and giving it quite the menacing image. We stared in silence at the tree for a few moments before lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the forest, followed by a billowing crash of thunder. "Did you see that?" JB yelled, speaking so quickly his words slurred together. "See what? See what?" Murph anxiously replied. "I saw something in the trees, something moved," JB hysterically stated. "It's probably just a deer or something," Parker said calmly. "I don't care, I'm leaving now," JB proclaimed, turning around and marching away, with Murph close behind. "You know, the rain is picking up, and I'm getting cold. I'm okay with being done here," I said, and Leon and Parker nodded as we followed our friends back the way we came. Once we reached the tracks, the conversation naturally shifted to what girls in school we thought were cute, as we were all single teenaged boys. JB was particularly sensitive about his crush, and when her name was mentioned, Parker and I began to tease him, expecting his usual over-exaggerated reaction. However, this time, there was no reply. As I turned back to look at my friend, I saw him standing a few feet behind the group, staring into the dark with his back turned towards us. "JB, you okay?" asked Leon. "You don't see it," JB whispered, almost inaudible. "Come on, dude. You tried that already," I said, putting my arm around his shoulders. "No. Look. The man in red," JB replied, again barely above a whisper. I looked at Parker, and we both rolled our eyes before Leon tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Cuz wait. Look." I turned and squinted in the darkness, following JB's gaze, and to my shock, in the distance, there was a red glow, identical in hue to the inexplicable fire we had seen in my backyard earlier that evening. At first, I thought it was getting progressively brighter, but soon I realized it was in fact getting closer. As the light drew nearer, I began to make out a silhouette within the glow. A silhouette of a body. The human form itself was jet black, or perhaps so obscured by the night as to render details indistinguishable. Around the body, or whatever it was, a red aura surrounded the figure, similar to the way a halo appears around streetlights from far away. "What is that?" I began, before I felt JB collapse next to me. "Dude, are you okay?" Leon panicked, dropping to his knees to tend to our unconscious friend, but I couldn't take my eyes off the figure, which appeared to be moving in on us faster now. "'Cause we need to move. Now! Grab him and let's go!" I shouted at Leon, who looked up and gasped at the sight of the advancing entity. Thankfully, my cousin was easily the largest of our group, a linebacker for the school football team, and physically the strongest by a landslide. In contrast, JB was co-captain with me on the cross-country team, and thus less than half Leon's size. In one motion, Leon hoisted JB onto his shoulders and followed me back down the tracks, with Parker and Murph trailing behind. When we got back to my father's garage, he had already put out the fire and gone to bed. We sat JB up in a chair and caught our breath before discussing what we should do. At that moment, we heard the chair move and turned to see JB standing straight up, facing the forest. JB, you good?" I asked, moving in front of him to see his face. My heart nearly stopped as I looked into his eyes. They were completely black. Now, I've since gone to college and gained 2 science degrees, and I keep trying to tell myself that the rational explanation was that his pupils were dilated out of fear, and the dim light of the garage just made it difficult to see the whites of his eyes. Even so, I can't deny that he looked exactly the way Hollywood depicts someone possessed by a demon. "Let's get him back in the chair," Murph said, placing his hands on JB's shoulders in an attempt to move him, but JB wouldn't budge. Even with Leon's help, all 4 of us could not get JB to move an inch. It was like he became a solid mass of stone, affixed to the ground. We tried to no avail for several minutes before collapsing into our chairs. We sat together, eyeing JB and trying to make sense of what was happening well into the morning, until one by one, we all fell asleep. I was the first to wake up and immediately looked over to where JB had been standing. He lay on the ground, seemingly unconscious again. "Cuz?" I said, hitting Leon's arm with the back of my hand as he slumbered beside me. He awoke, and we both kneeled to shake JB. He opened his eyes, and they looked the same as they always had, no longer black. "What? Go away, I'm tired," he grumbled. "Wait, why am I on the ground?" he asked, slowly getting to his feet. This prompted Parker to wake up as well, who nudged Murph until he was awake. We asked JB if he felt alright, to which he didn't understand our concern. We reminded him that he had seen the red figure and passed out, but he had no recollection of the night's events. "Don't mess with me, guys. You know I hate that. I thought we were just going to check out that stupid maze. What happened after that?" he asked, voice shaking. I looked at my friends, all of us standing in silence. Together, we recounted what had happened. When it got to the part about the entity, I looked to Parker for some clarity. "I don't really know what happened, honestly," he began. "We saw you staring at nothing, and then Rye put his arm on you, and you went down hard. Rye yelled at Leon to pick you up, and they both took off, and Murph followed. I turned back to see what the big deal was, and I didn't see anything, but I just started to feel wrong. Like it felt as if the temperature suddenly dropped 20 degrees, and that something was watching me. So I just ran after you." "You mean you didn't run because you heard it?" Murph asked weakly. We all turned to him. "Heard what?" I asked, tensing up. "After Rye and Leon ran past, there was that gust of wind and something whispered, 'Leave this place.' I thought that's why you took off too," Murph said, chin quivering. We all remained quiet for some time before my father came out and asked us if we wanted breakfast. We nodded solemnly and followed him inside. It's been a decade since this all happened. Parker and JB moved out of state. Leon got married and had a kid, and Murph never has time outside of work, so we don't go out on Halloween anymore. But we still try to get together for everyone's birthday each year, and every once in a while on my birthday, we talk about what happened the night I turned 18. Even now, we still don't have an explanation. But you can bet that was the last time any of us went out back in those woods. The Eyes, from Michael Goodwin. You could fairly describe it as a functional ghost town now, I suppose. It had once been a relatively important town due to the railroads, but those days were now but a memory. The downtown area still existed, though in a sort of theme park way. With very few exceptions, all the ancient buildings were now antique shops, populated by equally ancient ladies. Added to this were a few ice cream parlors, a restaurant or two, and a dank shady bar off to the side of the map, like a delinquent kid in the class picture. Go ahead and guess which one I worked in. To understand this town is to first understand that it's currently based on a lie. The image of the town being a bustling railroad destination isn't inaccurate, but where it gets interesting though is the history. All these little antique shops and parlors were almost all brothels, gambling dens, and all manner of establishments of ill repute at one time. In their better days, the residents of the city once all gathered together in great jubilation. For what occasion was this, you might ask? Well, for a train wreck. These people actually had old-time photos of their relatives standing on the wreck of 2 trains, dressed in their Sunday fineries. Did they rescue the victims, you might wonder? No, they rifled through the pockets of the dead or dying. The other claim to fame they had was assaulting a circus. Now, when I say this, I don't mean there was a disagreement about ticket prices or perhaps the dunking booth was rigged and they had a scuffle. I mean that as a town they attacked a traveling circus. Nobody quite knows why. The reason I bring this up is that the descendants of these delightful folk still reside there. So while every day this town was rife with civilized people from the surrounding cities, they were outsiders. Every evening at 6 o'clock, the Great Blue Hare Migration took place, and all those decent and kind people headed for the highway. Only one business remained open after that, the only establishment open for several square miles. Mine. A bar in the middle of an abandoned city is quite a thing to see. When that bar is populated by people of, shall we say, lesser virtue, it gets a touch apprehensive. So it was in the fall of 2003 that all that tension finally found a spark. A big, nasty, soggy spark. That year, God apparently had just about enough of these people and sent a flood to get them. A few abandoned mining shafts, a decent portion of abandoned homes were washed away in a series of storms and overflows. That wasn't the worst of it, though. You see, around 200 years ago, someone decided to buy the cemetery with a calming river flowing through it. Thanks to years of erosion and a sudden blast of surging water on an already waterlogged lowland, well, you get yourself a corpse navy. For days, what passed for the municipal workers were rounding up old Uncle Remus and Aunt Hattie. While recovering the caskets, there was a detail I only heard about when they were drinking their lunches on break. Most of the caskets were empty, or what remained was gnawed upon. And by gnawed, I mean it looked as if a wood chipper went after them. At the time, I didn't put it past these ghouls to resort to eating their dead, but I'm pretty sure you get some sort of disease from eating grandpa jerky, so I chalked it up to wolves or bears. I was wrong. It wouldn't even be a week before I first saw the eyes. It began out in the train yard at first. My bar was on a street that housed an old train depot, a historic hotel, and a few other relics. When leaving that night after cleaning up, I caught the sight of light reflecting from two eyes. You know, like how headlights will reflect off a raccoon or something. There was a singular street lamp, mainly for decorative purposes, lighting a gazebo on the corner of the depot and hotel. Both buildings had long since been gutted, leaving only a nicely painted shell for folks to come admire. That was the problem. I saw the lights on the second floor. I figured it must have been an owl, or perhaps something that climbed, but I couldn't figure out why it was eyeballing me. I'm hardly a food source for an owl. Either way, I walked to my car about 200 yards away in the fenced-in parking lot. The eyes followed me the whole time. I could never quite see what was up there. The street lamp was modeled after those old Victorian street lamps, so it used an underpowered light bulb. For the next week, things went the same. Every night around 3, I would leave and see the eyes. Every night, they would be a bit closer. I also noticed something odd. I heard nothing. By this I mean bugs, wind, leaves. It was all quiet. I'm not saying this thing was manipulating the weather. I'm saying that my sole focus was on it. My mind refused to acknowledge anything else. The wind was blowing, but I didn't feel it. The leaves danced among the trees, and I didn't hear it. Whatever instincts or sense of self-preservation I had was cluing me in on this thing being a bit more than just a big-headed bird, and to keep my attention on it. I admit now that I broke the law. In my state at the time, a firearm could only be transported in the trunk, separate from the ammunition. I would drive into work, retrieve my weapon from the trunk, insert the magazine, and put it in the waist of my pants in the back. I wasn't licensed to carry it, but at 3 a.m. while being stalked, you'd be amazed at how little you fear being hugged in the state pen. I'm also admitting to being guilty of stupidity. I should have quit. Things went on like this past Halloween and into November. By now, it was no longer content to remain down the street. It also kept changing its location. Some nights it was almost ground level. Others it was in the trees. It soon grew bored of our long-distance relationship. Buildings in this town were all 2 stories. My bar was no exception. The owner kept the second floor as a storage for God knows what, and it would gag a hoarder. Over a few days, there would be scratching or scraping noises coming from above me. The previous summer, this had happened with mice, so I wasn't concerned. Until it occurred to me that the scratching wasn't moving, it was stationary. Something was lightly clawing above me. I had a few customers at the time and we went to take a look. The problem was we could see nothing. Heck, even getting the door open was a Herculean task. One thing we could confirm though was a breeze. A window had been broken. Something shifted in the darkness, something bigger than a mouse, something that knew we couldn't get to it. We shut the door and called the police. Now, saying, "I think there's a godless monstrosity," over the phone is probably fun, but it ensures you'll be dealing with that monstrosity all by yourself. Well, you and two drunks. So I went with the possible addict scenario. They took 2 hours to arrive. In the meantime, we heard something clatter onto the dumpster and set off a car alarm. Apparently, godless monstrosities aren't known for their graceful jumping. Outside, we saw an impressive deforming of the plastic and a puddle of some sort of mucus. I'm guessing mucus. I didn't get anywhere near it. In the interests of science, I'll just say that it was thick and ropey looking, as it oozed down the side. Oh, and I bet it stunk. Over the week, my boss hired a few guys to clear out the second floor. He wanted to rent it out as an apartment anyway, and the need to replace 2 windows forced his hand. They found all manner of refuse up there. Let's just say quite a few missing pet posters could now be taken down. Unfortunately, this had an annoying side effect. A police officer greeted me at my car when I pulled in that night. This meant my firearm would remain in the trunk. We talked about the break-in as we walked. I left out the snarky comments about his prompt response time because at heart, I'm a coward. That night I noticed my admirer was right next to my car, 200 yards away and just out of the reach of the lights. Now though, I had it. No trees, no buildings, nothing could mask its size. My little friend was just north of 6 feet. This put us even, as I'm 6'7". I'm not saying it knew I was now unarmed. I'm saying it was in no way afraid of me. I think it was enjoying this process the same way a cat enjoys playing with a mouse. We know how that game ends for the mouse though. So I went back inside. 200 yards. Keep that in mind when I tell you that in the time it took me to lock the door, walk to the register and grab a pair of brass knuckles and a sawed-off pull cue, the eyes were right outside one of the many windows. Just far enough to keep out of sight, but much closer than any time before. I flipped off the lights. No way was I going to sit in a lit-up fishbowl, seeing my own reflection. It was time to see this butt-ugly freak for what he was. With no light to reflect off his eyes any longer, I could see very little. My plan wasn't exactly Patton-esque in its effectiveness. In the weeks leading up to this, there had been a debate as to what it could be. Most jokingly thought it was Bigfoot, but Bigfoot ain't slimy, so that was out. Some said a dogman. What is a dogman? Think of a wolfman who doesn't want to be sued for copyright infringement. An Indian guy even mentioned a skinwalker, but I'm about as Cherokee as a Chinese fellow, so I seriously doubt they'd be after me. Whatever it was out there sizing me up. I think, though, it was aware now that I was larger than it. It also knew I was not fleeing. This wasn't because I was brave, mind you, this was because I had nowhere to go. Slowly, very slowly, it backed away until I saw nothing. I never saw the eyes again. The best I can come up with are 2 possible explanations. First, it was an addict with grotesque features. I get that it seems like I'm being a jerk about the people of that town, but if anything, I'm underselling it. I can't, though, discount the possibility that I was merely being stalked by someone that night, and the months of those eyes were coincidental. The other possibility, the one that keeps me up some nights, is that the flood had washed something out of those mines, something that had been living on the abundant animal life of the area with little fear of being found. There is also the possibility it was using that graveyard as a snack bar, but I like to not think of that option. I think when it was flooded out, it used my bar as a den, waiting for me to leave each night. I think I angered it when we closed it off, and he came by one last time to even the score. I also think that he survived this long by not being seen. I think he fled for that reason, not for any fear of me. Either way, I left that town very shortly after. I gave my reason as the arrival of winter. Driving in the Michigan weather in December is a fine way to meet Jesus. I'm just in no hurry to do so. I heard the eyes were never seen again there. I'm betting my friend didn't fare too well in the cold, but that town is filled with all manner of abandoned buildings. In fact, that whole area is. I can't help but wonder if out of one of those many windows, something is watching the next poor soul to be sitting where I was. The only other life in the middle of a ghost town. It never leaves me. I've always joked that the paranormal was destined to be my normal, being born on Friday the 13th and all. Growing up, I quickly realized that I saw and felt things others didn't. These abilities really began to flourish in my teenage years. I would meet people and suddenly know things about them I couldn't possibly know. I would have premonitions, sometimes big things, like knowing what would happen in the lives of my family and friends, and sometimes little silly things, like knowing a train would be canceled. I had a couple of relatives pass in my teens, and I saw, smelled, and even felt them around me after they passed. They were comforting experiences, as if they were saying goodbye and letting me know they were okay. I remember one time I was washing dishes in the kitchen. I turned around to grab a towel and a bright white light flashed in front of me, like a camera flash going off or a strobe light. It was in the shape of a head and angel wings. I wanted to understand these experiences, and so I began to read as many books on psychic phenomena as I could get my hands on. I knew without a doubt that what I was experiencing was real, but I also liked to reflect and research on these encounters from different angles. For example, at my great-grandmother's old house in France, I saw 2 apparitions, but I just wasn't convinced they were actually spirits. Like, why would you die and just hang around in your old-fashioned clothes? Surely there's better things to do in the afterlife. I wondered if some of these encounters were just energy imprints left on time. We're all just vibration and energy after all, right? So perhaps in some circumstances I was merely taking a little peek into the past, tapping into old energy. From my research, I felt I had clairvoyant abilities, and I wanted to try to control them better, rather than just having random psychic experiences. I did everything you could possibly imagine to open myself up further. I meditated daily, worked with crystals, and eventually started giving readings to people. I would sit with people and hold their ring or watch and receive a little movie in my mind or through gut feelings and tell them what information I received about their past, present, and future. Sometimes I would get messages from people who had passed. Often I'd end up doing readings at parties with strangers, and many of these would become emotional. I felt as if I was helping people, and I never charged money for any of this. It was just something I loved to do. I started to write about my experiences, and then something magical happened. One of my favorite authors contacted me and offered me a scholarship to their mediumship course in America because they were impressed with my work they'd found online. This was the most amazing thing that had ever happened to me. I had all of this author's books about spirituality and the paranormal, and I couldn't believe I was going to meet them and study with them to own my skills even further. I was 21 at the time, and I went to America for a few weeks to do this. It was such a dream come true. The course was amazing. I loved that I was in a room with hundreds of people getting to talk about the paranormal and practice readings and healings on each other. And when I wasn't on the course, we'd have fun day trips out, going hiking and things like that. My trip even ended with this author inviting me to come back in a few months to work with them. Unfortunately, I was completely unaware of the horrors that were to come. When I went to catch my flight home, I was told the plane had been overbooked, and they were going to put me up in a hotel, and I would take a different route back to London in a few days. It was inconvenient, but not the worst thing, until I stepped foot into my temporary accommodation. As soon as I entered that room, something just felt off. There was a bad energy in that room. I felt as if I was being watched by someone or something with bad intentions. As I went to bed that night, I was horrified to catch a glimpse of something walking towards me in the room. It was a dark mass that looked like some kind of hunched-over creature or person. I slept with the lights on that night and spent as much time out of the hotel room as possible until I was finally able to fly home. That was the first time I'd ever seen something paranormal that had scared me. Usually, my experiences were all comforting and full of good vibes. I'll never forget the night the terror started. I was back in London, excitedly telling everyone how I would be going back to America in a few months for my new job. I said goodnight to my mom and went up to bed. As I lay down and pulled the duvet over myself, I heard it. I could hear breathing next to me. Heavy, slow, horrific breathing, right beside me in my darkened bedroom. I'm not sure I've ever been so scared in my whole life. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood on end. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever experienced. I ran downstairs and sat in the living room in complete shock. I still had goosebumps all over my body, and my mom looked puzzled. "I thought you went to bed," she said. And I made up some excuse as to why I had bolted down the stairs to sit with her. My life changed that night for a very long time. The breathing didn't stop. Whenever I was alone, it would happen right next to me. I started sleeping in the living room with the lights on for months. My family again were very puzzled by my new behavior. I tried to find ways to block out the heavy breathing. I put headphones on and would listen to music, only for something to begin pulling and tugging at the headphones. That was almost worse than the breathing itself. I tried hiding under the covers, but something would poke and push on the covers. I was being harassed by something I couldn't see. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified and confused. What the heck happened to me on that trip? Was it that creepy hotel I stayed in where I'd seen the dark mass coming towards me? Had something followed me home? I reached out to friends I'd made on the course, and they said it sounded like something had attached itself to me. I'd worked so hard to open up my energies and own my psychic abilities, and something dark had noticed me and taken a very keen interest in me. I felt as though things couldn't possibly get any worse. I was sleep deprived. I was terrified. And then came the night I saw it. I woke up in bed to the sounds of things being moved around my room and the feeling of pressure on my bed right next to me. I opened my eyes and I cannot even tell you the noise which came out of my mouth when I saw it. I half screamed, half whimpered as I saw something sitting on my bed, looking at me. It kind of looked like a woman, but with a wolf's snout. It had 2 dark eye sockets. There were no eyes, just darkness. It had long white hair and what looked to be a white dress. I'll never forget this as long as I live. That sight is burned into my memory forever. It looked like a combination of an animal and a person. It was just staring at me with these dark, empty eye sockets and that same heavy breathing I'd heard next to me for months. I jumped out of bed and turned on my bedroom light. That's when the banging began from inside my wardrobe. I can't believe my family didn't wake with all my screaming. I called my best friend in tears at 3 a.m., literally sobbing down the phone. I hadn't told anyone what was happening to me. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy, and I didn't want to scare anyone. But this was too much now. My friend thought someone in my family had died because I was crying so much. All I could tell her was, "It never leaves me." I couldn't believe my passion for spirituality and mysticism, the most sacred and special part of my life, was now bringing me this utter trauma. I didn't sign on for this poltergeist demonic crap. I wanted out. And still, it wasn't over. My best friend had to take my early morning calls for months on end. There was the time I woke up and saw arms reaching towards me from my ceiling. I would see objects in my room just move around in front of me, banging, scratching on the walls and being touched. Being touched was the absolute worst. I could feel it pulling my hair. It was terrifying. I was exhausted from being so scared all the time. Sometimes I would wake up with bruises and scratches on my body. I dreaded to think what was happening to me in those few moments I managed to sleep at night. That was it. I went into overdrive, trying to rid myself of whatever the heck had attached itself to me. I burned sage. I put black obsidian crystals in every corner of my room for protection. I even went to my local church to get holy water to sprinkle around my bedroom. I'm not particularly religious. I've always just considered myself very spiritual. I know something is out there, but I've never wanted to put a label on it. However, my grandmother is very religious, and I always found comfort and power in the crosses and things in her house. And at this dark time, they did help to make me feel a little more protected. Thankfully, during this whole experience, my family were always safe. Nothing ever happened to anyone else. It was just me. It only wanted me. The breathing and touching even followed me to work. Honestly, when I think back on that time, it really was pure heck. As I cleansed the space around me daily, I began to feel less afraid. I got my power back, and I think whatever was harassing me became weaker because I became less fearful. This is going to sound weird, but the heavy breathing and poltergeist activity was so constant that it just became normal. I was so tired I just couldn't even be bothered to be terrified anymore. This was just my life now. I never thought that such terrible things could become normal, but they did, and my fear faded. And as my fear faded and I continued to cleanse my environment daily with sage and all of those things, this demon, or whatever it was, lost its power over me. And over time, the breathing became less, and I think about a year later, I was finally able to sleep through the night again, in the dark, without holy water. No breathing, no prodding or pulling, nothing being moved around my room. It had finally left me. My life now is very different. I'm still incredibly spiritual, but it's a very private thing. I don't do readings, and I never intentionally try to tap into energies. I still have random experiences and premonitions, but I'm happy to say it's back to how it was before. All love and good vibes. I can't really watch ghost movies anymore. You know, things like The Conjuring and Paranormal Activity, as those movies just make me feel sick in my stomach. After all, I lived through my own personal version of that. So to me, it's not fiction. So it just creeps me out and brings back awful memories of such a long period of time, completely living in fear. I have the uttermost respect for the paranormal now, and I've learned not to open doors to things you don't understand. You have no idea what you might invite in. Northern Afghanistan. From Rooster. Afghanistan is a brutal place. Even though I've been home for well over a year now, some of the things I saw there still haunt me. This story is about the many ghosts of that land, and therefore I will not discuss anything else but that. Faryab province is a northern province in Afghanistan, along the border of Turkmenistan. I was at a very small FOB, which was called Mayamana. This little base was always in blackout conditions, and it was some rough living, although better than some other places I went to. It did have running water, but it was undrinkable, and every single meal I ate came from a bag, aka an MRE. There was a group of Afghan army commandos that had been ambushed by the Taliban and had taken very heavy casualties. They were evacuated to Mayamana because there was a German army surgical team there. A lot of these men who were brought there died. Now, as I said, this place was in blackout conditions, which, if you don't know, that means no light should be shined at night. You can use a red light if necessary, but generally, no light should be used at night. This is a military practice to prevent an enemy from killing soldiers with accurate snipers, mortars, or RPGs. During my time there, I worked on this piece of important communications equipment almost all 24 hours of the day. I would work from 10 a.m. to 6 a.m., which means through the day and through the night. Apart from some of the uplift platoon who were in the towers, I was probably one of the only others awake at night. Navigating my way to the bathrooms, my cot, or anywhere at night was not easy. It gets pitch black at night, so often I would use my night vision goggles to get around. One night at about 4 a.m., I was taking a break from my work and sitting on some stairs smoking a cigarette, contemplating if the GI Bill was going to be worth this, when I heard someone walking on the gravel path. This didn't really seem out of order, but the gait of the person sounded odd. I know that sounds dumb, but it sounded like someone was walking with a boot on one foot and the other one bare. One footstep was loud and the other was muffled or lighter. I turned on the knob of my night vision goggles and put them to my eyes, but I didn't see anyone on the path, which to me didn't make any sense because they sounded maybe 15 feet away. When I stood up and took a step to get a better look, the walking stopped. Well, that confused me, so I walked towards where the person stopped. There was no one there at all. I decided I was just tired, so I just went to the Connex, where we had our foodstuffs, and grabbed like 4 Rippets. These are crappy 2-flavor caffeine-filled energy drinks that'll burn holes in your stomach. I took my little lifesavers, put 3 in the dump pouch on my battle belt, and lit another cigarette on my way back to the stairs I was on earlier. When I was almost there, I heard it again. The same person walking weird. They were walking behind me this time. I don't think I could have turned around faster than I did, only to discover nothing again. I was getting super on edge. I removed my pistol from its holster when I heard another noise from behind me on my stairs. I had my gun in a low, ready position when I saw one of the local cats that we had called Mana tear tail up the stairs. I felt like an idiot. I decocked and reholstered my pistol. Just as my heart rate began to normalize, I heard a voice behind me. Assalamu alaikum. I just about jumped out of my skin and dropped my rippet and almost inhaled my cigarette. Wa alaikum salam, I replied as I turned around. A dead man's face was literally right in mine. His face was bathed in the green tint of my goggles, and his eyes didn't reflect. This startled me so bad, I was trying to backpedal, and just ended up on my rear in the gravel, staring at a man that I'd seen die just a few days ago. He wore the same torn and bloodied uniform. His shrapnel-filled leg had a tourniquet still on, but no boot on that side. I stared in disbelief. I scrambled for my pistol, but then he just wasn't there. He disappeared, no sounds, just nothing. I was left alone and confused, sitting in a puddle of rippet from how I'd fallen on them and popped them in my dump pouch. I never saw or heard him again the rest of my stay there, but I did always feel watched late at night. I left there not too long after that and went on to other places that gave me even more stories, if anyone cares to hear them. The Cumberland Plateau, from Hal, the Bird Lady. This is a true story that happened while I was driving back from Kansas City to Knoxville in January of 2016. I'm not sure what happened that night. The closest category I can think of would be a glitch in the Matrix. This event changed my philosophy of time and space, and my mother, who's a Christian that won't lie about anything, was in the passenger seat. The context of the trip was I had to drive from Knoxville, Tennessee to Kansas City, Kansas for my sister's custody hearing. I'd been to Kansas City before and I didn't like it. The drive is about 18 hours each way. I thought the worst thing was the EF3 tornado that my dad nearly drove us into the year before, but this one takes first place. The custody hearing went in our favor. I'd gotten about 4 hours of sleep before having to drive back to East Tennessee. I was drinking tons of energy drinks just to get it over with and be back home. I wouldn't be getting home on schedule. I was going eastbound on the Cumberland Plateau. I'll give some context here. The plateau has a westbound side and an eastbound side. Each side is separate from the other. meaning you can't see the westbound side if you're on the eastbound. They're separate one-way roads. Each road through the plateau has 2 lanes. It was about 1:30 a.m. I had the GPS on my phone on. My mother and sister were both asleep in the car, and my car was the only car on the road, until a vehicle came up behind me at a high speed. I was in no mood to play road games, especially with my mom and sister in the car, but the vehicle got right on my bumper with high beams on. To me, it looked like a truck, because the headlights were higher than my sedans. I decided they could just get in the other lane and pass me. I don't like pacifying bullies on the road, but I had a bad feeling about this one. I had my pistol loaded and ready. I never hesitate defending myself and my family. This guy just wouldn't do the right thing and pass me. So after a minute of him harassing me, I gave up and moved to the right lane. I was emboldened with my pistol at the ready, so I decided to flip this jerk off as he passed me, like he was the king of the road. My initial anger got worse when I saw it was an ambulance driving so recklessly. I was still flipping him off, but I noticed something very odd about the ambulance. For one, there was no passenger EMT, and I could not see the driver. As it sped past, I looked at the back. The lights were on in the back, but there was no patient. I just saw an empty gurney with the lights on. So there I was driving my family in the middle of the night, and this bizarre ambulance was the only other vehicle on the road. I kept thinking how odd it was that I couldn't see anyone in that ambulance. I convinced myself the driver must be obscured by something, but I knew for sure there was no one in the passenger seat, and the lights were on with no patient. I've never seen that before nor since this event. It sped around the bend, and that was the last I saw of it. Sure, it was going faster than I was, but I should have still been able to see its lights. I was very unsettled, but all I cared about was getting back home. I was very sore from 2 days of driving. What happened next, I'll never be able to explain. I kept driving. Getting through the plateau only takes 10 to 20 minutes maximum. I passed a sign that read Crossville 5 miles. I kept going only to see the same exact sign 5 minutes later. And again, every 5 minutes I kept driving. This was going on for an hour. Keep in mind it only takes 20 minutes max if you drive slow to get through this plateau. I was exceeding the speed limit by 15 miles over. There are lots of curves on the road, so I really was white-knuckle driving, just trying to get out. I should also add there are no exit ramps, no way to get turned around since it's one way, and no streetlights. After the hour of driving and seeing that sign, I was really panicking, and my mother woke up. I told her, "I don't know what's going on, but we're stuck on this plateau." She obviously didn't understand, and asked if there was car trouble. There wasn't. Then here comes that sign again, Crossville 5 miles. My mom remarked, "We're fine, Crossville is coming up." I told her she'd be seeing that sign again in 5 minutes. Well, she did, but she said something about the Tennessee Department of Transportation accidentally putting the sign up twice. I told her that's not what was going on. At this time, I told her about the ambulance that looked completely unmanned, and how it vanished after going around one bend, and the endless sign commencing after that ambulance. We sat in silence for a few moments, and I started putting it together in my head. I came to the conclusion I must have fallen asleep at the wheel, killing myself and my family, and the ambulance was symbolic of that. I thought we'd be stuck on this road forever. I can't even put into words how horrifying that thought is, that I'd killed my family. I finally broke the silence, saying a sentence I hate repeating and hope to never say again. I was crying at this point. "Mom, are we dead?" My mom finally replied, "I don't know." Keep in mind my mother is a Christian. She doesn't believe in in-between worlds and weirdness, like we were experiencing. I kept driving in silence and crying. I could not believe what was happening. But finally, we saw a different sign, one that cautioned that there was heavy fog. It was one of those signs that change messages depending on the traffic situation. I felt hope, but there wasn't any fog at all. After seeing the fog warning sign, I blinked my eyes and suddenly, we were out. We were on a 4-lane highway surrounded by other cars. I couldn't even try to figure out how that happened. All I know is we were overjoyed that we were alive. Nothing else of note happened on this trip. I was in the Cumberland Plateau for 1.5 hours, but I arrived home only 1 hour later than expected. To this day, I have no idea what happened that night or why. It was like we were trapped in a time loop, proceeding that strange ambulance. We've told a few people, and the only reason anyone believes it is because my mom backs up the story, and everyone knows she never lies. It was as if time and reality as I knew it ceased to exist that night. I've been through the plateau since then, and nothing has ever happened again. It will always remain a creepy mystery for my family. Old Family Tale from Caddy Vengeance. My surname is Stonecker, and my family has been established in West Virginia since the early 1700s. Although there are a few historical sites with our name attached to it, my parents didn't really have much to do with them. Actually, I only found out about my family's connections to actual historical locations when I was researching the authenticity of an old family legend. This legend involves a woman, my 5th or 6th removed grandmother on my dad's side, named Zelda, and her husband, whose name I believe was Simon. The story goes as my dad told it to me. Simon was the 3rd or 4th son of a Samuel Stonecker and was born somewhere around 1810. He married early in life, but his first wife, who remained unnamed, disappeared. Later on, in his mid-20s, he married again, this time to Zelda, whose previous surname had been something like Westfall or Westerfall. Anyway, they had a son their first year of marriage, and things were going fine in their little cabin household up to that point. They were farmers by trade, but Simon was also a carpenter, and that's where most of their money came from. Simon liked to drink. He didn't care for the domestic life, and he disliked his son's crying, believing that Zelda focused too much on the child and not her chores or wifely duties. Remember, this was the 1800s, and things were sometimes messed up about women's roles. Anyway, he started fighting with her. She argued that her son came before everything else, including Simon, which didn't sit well with him. According to my dad, that was probably the start of it. Simon started drinking their money away, and when he got home, he was abusive toward his wife and young son. It was at this point that Zelda became pregnant again. After a long and strenuous pregnancy, Zelda gave birth to a daughter, whose name I can't remember. Now with a young toddler and another baby taking up most of Zelda's time, and subsequently distracting her, Simon grew worse. He began to hit his wife, and eventually turned on his young son too. It was a miserable time. Their living space also suffered from Simon's negligence. He constantly smashed things, broke glass, slammed doors hard enough to break their latches, and even though he was a skilled carpenter, he would not do anything to fix or maintain the house. Zelda had limited resources and could only fix so much. It was around the time their son turned 6 or maybe 7 when Zelda had enough. She packed what little she owned, sold some old heirlooms, and prepared to take her children away. Divorce was still very uncommon and even frowned upon at this time, and a woman alone wouldn't have much chance to do well. But it was either that or subject her children to this man's cruelty. There was just one problem. Simon found out somehow that his wife was planning on leaving him, and he wasn't pleased to let her go. He caught her trying to leave and beat her almost to death. He told her to wait where he left her while he took care of the children. And Zelda, having suffered, having endured, if only for her children, she snapped. While he went outside to retrieve a wood-cutting hatchet, she somehow found her strength. Zelda got up, wiped blood from her face, and dragged her body to their small bedroom. There, her husband's loaded rifle lay on a stand. She took it up, and when Simon dared to come back to the entryway of their home, she shot him dead. Zelda only took enough time to dig him a shallow plot in their garden, kick him inside, and tend to her injuries a bit. Then, with rifle slung over her shoulder, daughter on her hip, and son clutching her hand, she walked her children out of the place and made a life for herself elsewhere, settling either in Rowan or Boone County, West Virginia. Her great-grandchildren took root over in Jackson County, and that's where they stayed, passing this story down over time, until it came down to me and my sister. Now, here's the interesting part. The old Stonecker cabin was lost to time. Nobody wanted it, and the land it sat on was pretty worthless after that. And as far as anyone knows, old Simon is still buried somewhere on that land in an unmarked grave. He's tied to a legend that's called Lantern Man or Lantern Ghost. People report the apparition of a shadowy man toting a lantern and a hatchet who will wander aimlessly over the hills, like he's searching. My dad seemed to think he was looking for his kids to finish what he'd planned to start the night he died. Hearing that as a young child scared the life out of me. I'd like to visit that old place one day to see if I can see old Simon. I wonder if he'd recognize me as his kin, and if he did, what would happen? It's as dreadful as it is exciting to think about. If I ever do go, rest assured I'll let you all know. The Staircase, from Jean Romeo. When I was in high school, there was a creepy story that used to go around. It is said that in the small wooded area that sat behind the school, there was once a small monastery. The monastery had sat there for 100 years or so before being knocked down. Reportedly, it was knocked down as several people had mysteriously died within its walls, and many of the locals thought it must be cursed, and so demanded it be torn down. As per the locals' wishes, the monastery was torn down, and all that now remained of the building was a single staircase. Why they left the staircase intact, nobody really knows. But since then, it was said that if you walked up to the top of the staircase alone and chanted a special verse, you would be visited by an old monk that had died there. What happened when the monk visited you varied, depending on who you asked. Either you got a good scare from an actual ghost, or in the worst-case scenario version, you wound up missing, or even dead. Of course, being kids, some people, namely a group of boys from my year group, thought it would be funny to go and find the staircase and walk up it one by one, chanting the verse. None of them truly believed the story, but wanted to look cool in front of everyone else. For the purpose of not wanting anyone to try this ritual, I will not repeat the verse here. Call me superstitious, but I don't like to mess with these things. Anyway, the group of boys decided to attempt the ritual one afternoon after school. There were 4 of them in total, and they were followed by a group of girls who wanted to see what would happen. I unfortunately got roped into following them by one of my friends, but steadfastly refused to actually participate in the ritual. So we all trudged through the small wooded area, and it didn't take long for us to come across the staircase. The boys were laughing, heading straight to the staircase, while the rest of us held back, watching with interest. The first boy, the ringleader of the group, started stomping up the staircase, chanting the verse as loudly as he could. The others laughed at him and started clapping, applauding his bravery. He walked back down, and all 3 remaining boys took their turn, all of them running up the stairs, shouting out the words. Some of the girls even felt brave enough to try it themselves, but I resolutely stayed back. Though in my logical brain I knew it was just some story, it still didn't feel right to mess with such things. After everyone had their turn, we all headed back out of the woods and made our respective ways back home. Over the next few days, all anyone could talk about was about how brave the girls and boys were for daring to do such a scary ritual. The boys especially basked in the attention, and it even led to a few others in other year groups attempting the ritual too. Eventually, everything died down, and just as we all thought, nothing strange happened. Time passed, and most of the people around me forgot the story, too caught up in the next craze. But then I remember walking into my first lesson of the day one morning, About a couple of weeks later, I saw the 4 boys all sat around a table, whispering to each other. It was odd to see such usually rambunctious boys so quiet and solemn. I strained my ear in an effort to listen, but my attempts were unsuccessful. Just then, the teacher came in, and the boys grew quiet, and the teacher began the lesson. Lunchtime the same day, I found out what they'd been talking about. The ringleader of the group, A, had said that his family had been experiencing a lot of bad luck recently. His dad had gotten in trouble at work, and one of his grandparents had gotten sick. Adding to that, his brother had been in an accident and hurt his leg. At first, I felt bad for A. I didn't make a connection with the staircase. More time passed, and I heard more stories come from the rest of the group, and some of the girls who had also walked up the staircase. There was nothing about any ghostly sighting, but a continuous string of bad luck. One of the girls said that her mom had nearly gotten into a car accident, but had fortunately been able to swerve the car out of the way in time. I found it odd that all of the people who had carried out the ritual were now suddenly all experiencing horrible luck. This continued for several weeks, until eventually I stopped hearing any new stories. A ended up moving away as his dad's job was transferred to another city. Eventually, the events of those weeks became just a memory, but for the remainder of my time at the school, I gave that small wooded area a wide berth. Fast forward about 6 years later, and I'm randomly looking through Facebook, looking up the people I went to school with. I had been bad at keeping in touch and wanted to see what everyone was up to. I ended up striking up a conversation with one of the girls who had been there that day, B. B had reconnected with A when he moved back to our city a few years prior. They'd started a relationship, eventually getting married. Only what she told me next was strange. B said ever since high school, A had felt that he was followed by a streak of bad luck. As an adult, he had been somewhat successful, starting his own business, getting married, but something always went wrong. His business had failed within a few years of startup. Worse then, he lost his grandfather when he was 18, closely followed by his dad a year later. His dad had only been in his 40s and had been in good health, but had suddenly dropped dead of a heart attack. This brought back memories of high school, and of the day we all watched A and his friends climb the staircase. B and I ended up keeping in touch for several years after that, but one day I checked my phone and saw a Facebook notification from her, asking me to call her. I did, and she answered. Her words came out choked and broken, due to her biting back tears. A had been killed in a hit-and-run car accident. He was 28. I don't know if the curse of the steps is true, or maybe everyone's bad luck is coincidental, but something dark had followed A from that day, and now he is no longer with us. Should I feed it too? From Rose Coopera. My family resides in our home, in a rural area surrounded by farmlands and fruit trees. Living with us are our 4 aspens, a Filipino term for street dogs, 2 male puppies and 2 female adults, of which one was the mother of the former pair. Though they came from a breed of strays, they were taught to behave well, especially when being fed. It's been my routine to feed them thrice a day, and they usually have rice, meat shreds, and some leftovers from our family's meal. For grooming, they were bathed and provided with flea treatments. Haircuts were only done twice for their entire lifetime as they were short-haired. They're actually low-maintenance dogs, but sometimes could get a bit too much to handle for a small girl like me. A dog lover that I was and still am, I always see to it that their needs were tended to. I never once complained about doing the pet-related chores, until that one unforgettable night. That evening, my mom and sisters were already in bed. I was alone in the kitchen prepping the dog's meal. Above the kitchen sink was a small window viewing the backyard, and I was peeking through it to see what the dogs were up to. They were there, as usual, in their sitting positions with their tails wagging, waiting for me. Or probably just waiting for their food. Cute. They've got all their lives figured out. They were all staring at the back door, knowing food would be served soon. The back door was adjacent to the window. From inside the kitchen, I could easily see it in my left peripheral, and just a bit further to the right would be the pile of hungry dogs. I clearly remembered I was hunched over the tub of food when I looked outside. For a moment, I thought I saw a kid, standing between the door and the dogs facing the door. Was his head bowed down? What is a kid doing outside at this time? I looked again, and there was no one except for the dogs outside. Tired, I immediately dismissed the idea of having a kindergartner as a guest in the middle of the night. I fought the goosebumps and went on to my chore. With the dogs fed and lights turned off, I retired to my bed, forgetting what had happened. The following day, I was out with the dogs playing when I noticed one of them was missing its collar. It was a short red belt, just like his brother's, with his name sewn on it. I tried looking around, thinking it may have been dropped by the mutt nearby. However, I was called for an errand and wasn't able to find it. Come dinner time, I had to feed the hounds of heck again. At about 10:15, the house was pitch black, except for the opposite ends of the house, the parking in front and the kitchen where I was at, which was lit by a dim fluorescent bulb. I was wiping off the tiles when suddenly I felt chills down my spine when I remembered what I thought I saw the night before. It might have been someone else's kid loitering around, but it was dark that night, and children are at bedtime during those hours, or they should be. With those rushing thoughts, I mindlessly stepped out of the back door and poured mounds of dog food into all 4 of the bowls. Done with my job, I sat back in the doorway and watched the dogs finish their food. Then I stared blankly out to the dark yard. The open space in front of me was kind of enveloped in flat silence, with only the most subtle sounds coming from the cold night breeze, the rustling of leaves, and scratching of branches. It strangely felt heavy, and it was as if the darkness outside stared back at me. Only the little sloppy noises from the dogs, which I thought sounded a bit funny, calmed the unease. It was a split second, and everything fell to a deep hush. It felt like the air stopped moving around me. The trees were completely motionless. My eyes started scanning the entirety of the backyard when I sensed something was behind the papaya tree, a few meters from me and the dogs. The dim kitchen light helped me see of what I first thought was a hanging piece of cloth. I suddenly felt weak when I realized what I was looking at. It was the kid. I froze. The kid from the other night. But that kid, I thought, was some random neighbor's child. It was impossible to think that the kid was anyone's. As my gaze fell to his face, I noticed where his eyes should have been were only 2 tiny dark pits. No eyeballs. Just black open hollow pits. He stood motionless behind the tree. A ghost. My mind struggled to think right at that moment. My heart pounded even more when he made the slightest movement and held out his hand to me. Holy heck. The kid's got my dog's red collar in his hand. I ran back and slammed and bolted the door. My mom was startled by the noise and asked what the problem was. Though shaking, I was able to speak of something about the dogs fighting over their food. She believed me and told me to go to sleep early for class, and hurriedly went back to her room. Still, I was scared of what I'd seen, or what I thought I'd seen. I slowly peeked back out the window, but the boy was gone. I rushed to my bed and under the covers without turning off the light. Early in the morning, my sister woke me up and told me she found and picked up Barry's collar just outside the back door. That night, he or it didn't show up again, or the next few nights. I kept thinking about him for a while. Was the spirit kid looking for food? It was a weird thought, but it had shown up twice when I was feeding the dogs. Or it may have been just my imagination. Every time I see my dog and his red collar, though, I feel chills remembering the boy. I feared that he'd show up again one day. I've never told anyone about this, and up to now, my mom kept wondering why I had to put 5 bowls every time I had to feed the dogs at night. an offering to a stray that might just be in search for something to eat, and in hope that I would never be seeing him again. Ghoul Encounter in Transylvania, from Alex S.Z. I was born and lived in Romania until my late 20s, when I moved to Australia. When I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of weekends and school holidays at my grandparents' house in a little mountain village in Transylvania, a few kilometers from Bran Castle, more widely known as Dracula's Castle. Sorry if it disappoints early in my story, but this is not vampire-related, as some would expect to hear from that part of the world. However, after listening to this account, you might ask yourself the same questions as I do. I am a city boy, but always loved the picturesque mountains that surround my grandparents' small village. During the summer, I would spend weeks there, riding my mountain bike on dirt roads, hiking to nearby tourist spots, or reading whatever books I could get my hands on at the time. There was no internet there back in the day. No mobile phones, no GPS or fancy technology of the sorts. A completely different era. The summer before starting high school, my best friend and I were both 14, and we went to my grandparents to spend a couple of weeks bike riding, hiking, making the most out of the late summer weather. Two foolishly daring kids oblivious to taking risks, especially when we were doing stuff together. After about a week of riding the trails in and around the village, we decided to ramp it up a notch and go for a longer ride halfway to the nearby mountain peak, where we knew about a little tourist spot. There was a lookout there, a small cafe souvenir shop, and a car park where vendors would gather around tourist buses to sell trinkets and fresh forest fruit. We were kinda hoping to meet and befriend some cute girls our age, as such creatures were scarce in this village. With the plan ready, we got up early that morning, packing some spare clothes, snacks, and water, and deciding to follow a less circulated track, unmarked on our old tourist map. We hadn't been on that path before, but an old neighbor, who used to be a shepherd, said it was less steep than the marked tourist hiking trails, so it's easier to go uphill on a bike. Well, we assumed. Also, there were hardly any houses on the way. This was good news, as the people in the village kept guard dogs, which often gave chase to us when riding past on our bikes. I kissed Grandma goodbye and told her we'd be gone for most of the day. It was pretty sunny outside, with only a few fluffy clouds, so we didn't mind the weather. For the first couple of hours, we kept going uphill at a steady pace. The village remained well behind as we were approaching a thick pine forest. The track became much more difficult than anticipated, with lots of uneven loose rocks and overgrown vegetation. We didn't realize it was mainly used by sheep herds to go up the mountain in the spring and back in autumn, but the path was wide enough to ride side by side, so we kept going. After approximately 2 hours of riding with only short breaks for water, we came across a forest. Our path was going right through it, and we both felt a little bit nervous. Before venturing forward, we stopped to have a quick snack and rest a little. We'd left home early and made relatively good time to that point. We needed our energy back before the next uphill stage in our ride. It wasn't uncommon for hikers in that area to come face to face with brown bears, some of which were huge, almost as big as North American grizzlies. Attacks were few, but encountering a bear was honestly my biggest fear. Bears chasing me had been a recurring nightmare I've had growing up. I didn't want to look like a coward in front of my friend, however, so we got back on the bikes. As we were approaching the trees, we noticed a thin smoke rising over them. Hidden between the first row of trees, we noticed a small timber cabin covered with weathered wood shingles. It looked very old, run down, and we would have presumed it to be deserted if not for the smoke coming out of the chimney. The windows were small, dirty, and cracked. Adjoining the cabin was a derelict-looking tin shed, barely standing, leaning over the side of the cabin. The courtyard surrounding them was muddy, with some rusty buckets scattered around. The thing I noticed and still remember quite vividly was a large, darkened wood chopping block near the shed, with rusty chains nailed to it. It wasn't something out of the ordinary in rural Romania, where people would often sacrifice animals for food, but I guess those chains just gave me the heebie-jeebies. I was riding in front and slowed down a bit to wait for my friend. I made a childish joke, something like, "Hurry up, Theo, or the bad witch will fly out of that chimney, grab the last rider and toss him into her stew." I said it loudly enough for him to hear. 2 seconds later, the front door creaked open and a strange old man busted out, shouting at us with a guttural, broken voice. We were startled, but slowed down a bit to say good day. As we were taught, it was always the polite thing to do in our village. The old man then grabbed a wooden stick from near the door and started waving it, walking wobbly towards us, while continuing to yell something that we couldn't understand. He looked menacing, however, and frankly quite disgusting, with oily hair and ripped clothes, large yellow teeth, bulging eyes, and the veins on his face visibly pumping. The man was short but stocky, and we weren't going to wait around for him to make sense. We got pedaling right away, continuing our way on the rocky path, deeper into the forest. We soon lost sight of the house and the old man as we went around a bend. Theo and I were trying to laugh and joke about this weird encounter, but truth is we were both shaken up and knackered at that point. As soon as we cleared the forest, we had to stop and have a rest, drink water, and eat something. Our determination from early morning had completely washed off by that point. I felt pretty helpless and scared, realizing we underestimated our capacity to roam through the woods on our average quality mountain bikes. My legs were cramping up. Theo could barely breathe and was frustrated with his bike, which was having issues changing gears. Moreover, the front tire was slowly leaking air. This trip was not going very well, and we didn't find it enjoyable anymore, so we were weighing our options. Either we continue uphill for another couple of hours or so towards the tourist spot, and then return to the village on the regular hiking trail going downhill, or accept the defeat, abandon our goal, and go back the same way we came, back through the forest, past the creepy cabin, and follow the crappy path back home. The idea of giving up and going back did not sit well at all with our young male hormones, but there was one factor that got the city boys by surprise, and ultimately made the decision for us. The weather. Although it was fine in the morning, by the time we cleared the forest and got to the western side of the mountain, thick gray clouds began to gather. As we finished our snacks, it started to drizzle. We could now see the top of the mountain covered in a dense fog, which was slowly lowering towards us. So this was it. Without much enthusiasm, Theo and I made the rational decision to head back immediately, hoping to avoid a complete drenching on our way home. We put on our plastic raincoats. Theo pumped some air in his front tire, and we hopped back on the bikes, heading back into the forest. 5 minutes into the ride, the drizzle turned into proper rain, making some portions of the track muddy and slippery. A thin fog slowly engulfed the woods. Visibility was still okay, but the scenery became very eerie and gray. Theo and I were both silent, trying to keep our focus on the track ahead. I remember feeling really anxious and suddenly overwhelmed by what I could only describe as desperation to get out of the forest immediately. I was too scared to pedal any faster, as the bike was already skidding down the muddy track. I still very well remember the silhouette of that cabin coming into view. Needless to say, I found it 100 times creepier with the rainfall and gray mist surrounding it. Approaching the house, I was feeling my heart beating out of my chest, so I decided to counteract that by acting brave, rather being a jerk. I started ringing my bike bell, loudly shouting, "Hey Pops," or "Hey Creepo," along with some expletives a kid my age should not have used. Theo joined me with even more enthusiasm. These were some very poor decisions. As we were going past the house, I again noticed the chopping block. But now, it was all covered in blood, with a blood-soaked knife and axe on top of it. At the base were 2 buckets, one with a goat's head, tongue out, the other full of blood and entrails. There was something like steam rising from this second bucket. Presumably the kill was fresh and the organs still warm when tossed in there. I was still processing what I was seeing when suddenly we heard shouting. It sounded like the crazy old man again, but now we couldn't see him. I was disoriented and slowed down. I saw him walking backwards from behind his shed, shouting, his arms wide, like he was trying to block someone's way towards us. What happened next is a bit blurry, but I think I heard him say the words, "No, no, let them pass. I'll give you meat. You have goat." He was perhaps 10 to 15 meters away when I saw him being pushed aside by someone else, a person who was coming directly for us. As the old man fell on his rear, he turned and screamed at us, "Run!" It was too late though. This other man was running towards us. He was short and stocky, somewhat similar in build as the old man, but completely without clothes. His skin was gray and very, very cracked. These deep cracks were all over his body, like he had some massive scabs or a thick layer of dry mud covering him. I only caught a glimpse of his face as he let out a scream that sounded more like a wheeze and ran towards me. The eyes were recessed deep into their sockets and seemed cloudy yellow. His lips were missing. I found this to be the most disturbing part. His ghoul-like face still haunts me. The area around his mouth looked like the skin had been peeled off, exposing massive-looking teeth and black gums. The man's face was gray, as was the rest of his body. The only other thing I can remember are some rare locks of long dark hair over his eyes and to one side. The best overall description I could give you about this encounter is imagine a guy with some flesh-eating bacteria disease around his mouth, who also fell in thick mud, which later on dried up and cracked, remaining attached to his body. Not quite a zombie like you see in the movies, but not too far off either. I'm calling this man-creature a ghoul. It seems the most appropriate term to my understanding. I felt my blood freeze, seeing this thing coming towards me. I vaguely remember trying to control my legs to pedal faster, but they were just frozen. I couldn't even feel them. My mouth became instantly dry. The wheezing noise coming from this creature was horrendous, and to this day when I hear someone wheezing, it scares me. Although still in motion on the bike, I felt like a sitting duck, waiting for this ghoul to take a few more steps in front of my bike and grab me. My luck was the creature suddenly noticed Theo coming from behind me, and this disoriented him for a couple of seconds, enough for us to squeeze past. That moment, I think my adrenaline started pumping. I regained control of my body and was able to ride the bike away from there as fast as I could without looking back. It was a very close call. We could still hear the old man shouting, fading back for another minute or two. I can't remember much else from our way home. We were both in pretty bad shape when my grandparents saw us. We told them the whole story, and they seemed to believe us. For the next few days, I was trying to extract more info from them and our neighbors about the old man and the ghoul we encountered. Everyone we brought this up to acted very evasive, saying the old man is weird and has a mental issue, and that it's best we don't go near him again, which we weren't going to anyway. Nobody said anything about the ghoul, other than perhaps another madman who likes to walk around without clothing. From my discussions with Theo, he told me he saw exposed bone in one of the legs of the ghoul, and he was ready to swear that to be true. Theo also mentioned bloodstains on his thighs. I don't know about either of those, as much as I tried to remember more details. However, before I wrap this up, here comes the creepy end. Our further digging, years later, indicates the old man was the son of a soldier who died in mysterious circumstances not long after World War II was over. This man was said to have been a truly deranged person, who allegedly worked as an extermination camp guard during the war, while Romania was one of Germany's allies, though in 1944 they switched sides. He is said to have been cursed by a gypsy woman, perhaps a witch, who was imprisoned and later died in his camp. Upon his return from the war, the soldier fathered a son with a mentally disabled woman from the village. She was later on found dead in the woods, presumably killed and eaten by bears. The man was also on a downhill path, drinking lots and causing problems with the law. He hanged himself a few years after and was supposedly buried outside the church cemetery. Rumor has it a couple of grave robbers tried digging him out to steal valuables buried with the corpse, such as his gold teeth, but the wooden casket was empty. This is all hearsay, and record-keeping was never a strong point of post-war Romania, so I'm not too optimistic about finding more info about these people. I was told his cabin burned down, but honestly, I never went back there to check for myself. My theory is the World War II soldier was cursed, spiraled down to insanity, tried to off himself, but somehow remained alive or maybe undead, and his son, the old man, staged his burial and kept him out of sight for years after. What do you think, considering all the missing pieces of the puzzle? The Creature of the Coconino National Forest, from Bose Koala. It started when I moved to Flagstaff to attend college. My parents had come into some money and decided to pay for an apartment for me to live in if I kept my grades up. My fiancée Anne and our dog Rosebud and I were new in town, and school still had a few months before it started. I'd also brought my pet hedgehog with me, as I wasn't sure if anyone else in my family would have the time to take care of him. We both struggle with social anxiety, so we ended up becoming shut-ins, watching movies, playing video games together, ordering in pizza, and listening to podcasts. That's what we did for our first month in the apartment, just waiting for school to start. We went through dozens of video games over that month, and I ended up wanting to play something new. Well, new for me anyway, and I landed on Bloodborne. I loved the gothic and Lovecraftian horror in it, and enjoyed it a ton, even if I did suck at it. But it's not really a scary game, so to fulfill my horror needs, I listened to scary podcasts, which got me more interested in the paranormal and in cryptids. Now, my apartment was located by a forest, no more than, say, half an hour walk away, and there was also a park across the street from us. Often we'd hear kids screaming and having fun in the park, but the first odd occurrence was about a week away from school starting. My fiancée was packing up her things and getting ready to move into her dorm because her parents didn't agree with her living with me. And even though she ended up staying over at my place most nights, she needed to keep up appearances with them. I helped out, obviously, and many nights we were up late making sure we both had everything we needed for our first year of college. But one night our conversations about high school friends and talks of cryptids and the like were interrupted by blood-curdling screams. We rushed over to the window and looked out into the darkness of the park. We couldn't see anything, but more screams came. Our neighbors even stepped outside, shining a flashlight. The party going on in the apartment above us had come to a full stop. More screams. I dialed 911. The lines were busy, or maybe I couldn't get signal. We stepped outside, keeping our dog inside for her own safety. We both called 911 again in hopes of getting through, but still the lines were too busy. Looking around, other people were trying to call 911 too. Some were successful in reporting it. No one went to look into the park. As cliché as it sounds, I want to say something felt off about it. Not the scream. More like whoever it was wasn't screaming for help, and they weren't screaming for someone to stop hurting them. They were just screaming. Eventually, we went back inside as others did the same. We went to bed shaken that night. The air felt full of tension. I think our dog could even feel it, as she kept growling at the doors and windows all night. Once school started, my fiancée had to spend an entire week in her dorm, as it was Parents' Week, and her parents wanted to make sure she wasn't living with me during the school year, and only during summers. Nothing else odd had happened at that point, so my fiancée felt fine leaving me and Rosebud alone for a week. And it wasn't like we couldn't see each other at all, she just couldn't stay the night. Or so we thought. Her parents seemed to want to spend every free minute she had with her. I can understand that, and honestly I kind of wished my parents had shown up for Parents' Week, so I wasn't about to protest them having fun family time together. So I sucked it up and lived on my own that week. But I really wish I hadn't. It started the first night she was away. A knock at the door. I walked to the door and peeked through the peephole, and only saw the park across the street and the cars parked out front. It was odd, but I didn't think too much of it. I was focusing on getting my homework done that was assigned to me on the first day of school. Then another set of knocks came. I approached the door again, my dog growling and barking at it, moving her aside to peek outside again, but once more there was nothing. I assumed it was some neighborhood kids having fun, so I ignored it and went back to my homework. Yet again, the knocks came, much harder this time. I jumped at them. I approached the door hesitantly and peeked outside. Though still, there was no one there. I yelled out, "That was a good one, you really got me, but I'm trying to do homework. Can you stop?" No one replied, but nothing more happened that night. The following day, when I got back from school, I headed straight home and took a nap. It had been a long day, and I barely got any sleep the night before. I cuddled up with my pup on my bed and fell asleep early. We both awoke late at night to tapping at the window. She growled at it with her hackles standing on end, and I approached it, moving the curtain out of the way and looking outside. At first, I couldn't see anything, until I spotted a deer with massive antlers, almost comically large. It was walking around in the park across the street, but there was no sign of whoever was tapping in my window. I closed the curtains and turned on Netflix to try to ease the tension. With Parks and Rec playing in the background, I went to make myself and my dog some dinner. I was just about done cooking my meal, and Rosebud was probably about halfway done eating at that point, when we both heard tapping again, this time in the living room window. I was taken aback, but still figured some kids were trying to mess with me. I hesitantly approached the window and turned the blinds to look outside my apartment. There, about 8 feet away from my window, was the same deer eyeing me as I looked at it. It was illuminated by the scarce streetlights in the apartment complex. It trotted off after I looked at it. I was officially freaked out, and I tried my best to calm my barking dog. I watched TV the rest of the night and relaxed, knowing I didn't have any school the next day. Not much happened the rest of the week until Sunday. A knock on the door here, a tap on the window there, but I didn't think much of it. The deer had freaked me out, sure, but nothing had slammed into my door with force since the first night, so I didn't give it much mind. That day I had been missing my fiancée a lot, and couldn't wait until the next day when I could hold her again as I fell asleep. I was anxious and passing around my house like a madman. I took Rosebud on 5 walks and still couldn't sit still. So I decided to take all the energy I had and put it towards homework. I finished everything I needed to do for the next 2 weeks that day before lunch. I honestly thought it was going to be a great day. No knocking or tapping for the first half of the day, and my dog was all smiles and tail wags. My day got even better when my fiancée called to chat with me. We talked for hours on end, laughing and joking and having a great time. Then suddenly my day took a turn for the worst. A knock at my door. Slowly I stood up and walked out of my room when the knocking came again. I told my fiancée to wait for a minute while I checked the door. Another set of knocks came then, but then a voice came from the other side, one that sounded like my fiancée.
"Lovey, could you unlock the door? I forgot my keys at my dorm."
I laughed and asked on my phone why she was knocking when she could have just asked me to open the door through the phone. A bit freaked out, she replied,
"What are you talking about? I'm out antiquing with my parents."
I stood there, frozen, looking at the door. My dog, who had run excitedly to the door, stood there jumping on it, barking, wanting to see her mom. Not wanting to freak her out, I told her I was just messing with her, and I asked if I could call her back later. Thinking nothing of it, she agreed, and I hung up the phone. I grabbed Rosebud and walked away slowly as more knocks came, followed by more of my fiance's voice asking me to let her in. Step by step, I inched silently to the bathroom and broke down once I closed the door. I cried as I locked myself and my dog in until the next morning. I awoke to my fiance knocking on the bathroom door. I panicked at first and refused to open it, telling her she wasn't herself. Confused, my fiancée demanded I open the door because she had to use the restroom. Something about her voice was more calming than the day before, so I began to open the door nervously. Slowly, I cracked it open to see my fiancée standing there as she rushed past me and pushed me out of the bathroom so she could use it. I stood in my room dumbfounded. I'd thought whatever had been knocking at my door the night before had gotten in. That what I began to call the skinwalker had somehow broken in and was going to kill me and my dog right then and there. But no, it was only my fiancé finally having time to visit. Not wanting to sound like I'd completely lost it, I told her I must have fallen asleep in the bathroom while trimming our dog's nails and had been having a nightmare when she got home. She asked if I had school that day, and while I did, I explained I'd slept through all my classes that day and that we could just spend the rest of it together now. For about 2 months, things were good. I kept my horrific week a secret so as to not freak her out, and honestly, we were happy. We found the perfect balance between work and fun and were doing great. I had just come to accept by then that when my fiancé was away sometimes I'd hear knocks or taps, and that it was just something that happened, that it was nothing to worry about. Things got worse one night when our curtain had fallen off the wall. Our dog had pulled on it wanting to play while we were doing homework, and the curtain rod was pulled loose from the wall. Luckily, no one was hurt, but now our bedroom window could practically be seen through. Sure, we had blinds, but they were so thin you could make out the shadows and shapes of everyone that walked by outside. My fiancé fell asleep first that night, but I couldn't sleep. I kept finding myself staring at the window in fear. I lay there looking at the window for hours, trying to convince myself that I was only paranoid because of the supposedly true scary stories I'd listened to earlier in the day, that I was just creeped out. That's when I heard hooves coming down the sidewalk, followed by the sound of something walking in the dirt outside our window. My heart was beating harder than ever before, and I couldn't catch my breath. It was right there. I knew it was. My eyes stayed glued on the window until I passed out. I awoke to a voice talking. "That was a good one. You really got me." I looked over at my fiancée and said, "What?" She snored in response, so I turned back the way I was facing towards the window. That's when I saw the silhouette of a man staring into our room. It couldn't be, I thought. That was just the shadow of one of the cars or the staircase outside that I didn't notice before. I convinced myself and fell back to sleep. This continued for months. Nightly visits from a shadowy figure, watching me, watching my dog, watching my future wife as we slept. I watched in horror most nights, being unable to sleep until unconsciousness forcibly took me. My sleep schedule was ruined, and my grades were plummeting, so many times I'd just skip school and stay home to catch up on some sleep. I want to say it was around mid-October when I decided enough was enough. I stapled a blanket over the window. This wouldn't solve the issue permanently, sadly. Until around December it would hold, and those nights weren't too bad, besides Halloween. God, how horrible Halloween was. Both mine and my fiancé's favorite holiday was ruined that year. It started that morning with the upstairs neighbors having a big fight. I swear it was contagious or something. The two of us ended up fighting for a big part of the day. And from the sounds of it, our neighbors on our right and behind us also got into huge arguments as well. But the upstairs neighbors' fight was the worst. We never saw the man that used to live there again, only the woman. And even then she eventually just disappeared, becoming a complete shut-in. I think their fight broke her. I think it broke all of us, honestly. But Halloween wasn't done with us yet. Of course it wasn't. On a day that celebrates the spooky and horrific, of course the thing that taunted and played with us would torture us that night. Bang, bang, bang. The door slammed loudly, and for the first time, my fiancée was around to hear it. She went to answer it, but I'd peeked out from our bedroom window that looked out onto our tiny patio, which was more of just a railing and single step to the door, and instead of trick-or-treaters, I saw a coyote staring daggers at the door, its fur standing on end. It looked like it was growling, but was completely silent. The thing looked messed up, like it had survived 100 fights. Scars ran along its side and it was missing its ears. I screamed for my fiancée to check the peephole before opening the door. "Why? It's just trick-or-treaters," she yelled back. "Yeah, but there's been 2 forceful entries in the complex the last 2 days. Just keep an eye out is all." I lied through my teeth. I hated lying to her. In general, I hate lying, but to lie to my fiancée felt wrong. "Oh God, yeah, I'll check the peephole. I didn't know about that," she shouted back. Many more times that night, the door would slam. Luckily, the front door was the only thing about that apartment that was built well. Our dog got a little sleep that night. She was barking and howling at the door. I would have worried about a noise complaint if every dog in the neighborhood wasn't also making just as much noise. Then the weirdest thing happened. We heard slamming on the front door of the apartment on the other end of our row. Then door by door, the slamming continued until it reached our door. Whatever or whoever it was began pounding on the door and jiggling the doorknob. Angry yelling of,
"This is the police. Open up."
could be heard outside. But looking outside through the peephole was only that deer I'd seen months ago. My fiancée begged me to open the door, believing it really was the police. She refused to hear my reasoning, telling me that it had to be the cops. The door started to be banged into harder, and when I looked out the peephole, the deer was gone. I pressed myself against the door. The commands from the so-called police continued as I demanded my fiancée call the actual police and tell them an impersonator was trying to break in. The lines were busy though. I cried out in pain as the door slammed me around wildly, and then everything went silent for a few minutes, followed by the most horrific noise I've ever heard. It sounded like a dozen women were standing in the park and screaming at the top of their lungs. I tried dialing the police again, and I could not get through, so I began to look for my fiancée's phone. When I looked in our bedroom, I saw her holding her nose, which was now gushing blood. She was prone to nosebleeds, but this was an insane amount. I rushed into the bathroom and grabbed a hand towel and held it to her nose as she began to cry. Our dog, meanwhile, lay next to us, growling at the windows, but never leaving our side. Eventually, the screaming stopped, and we were able to report what happened to the police. It turned out a lot of other people in our complex had already called, but they agreed to stop by and take our statement too, on the events of that night. After that night, the window tapping and door knocking would happen around my fiancée too, instead of only when I was alone. It was creepy, sure, but besides that, we didn't worry much about it, and thought the worst was over. But we were at each other's throats constantly. For little mistakes and mess-ups, we'd blame each other and get into screaming matches regularly. It led us to seriously considering breaking up at one point. Luckily, we worked through it, but neither of us ever felt like ourselves during these fights. We'd cross lines and insult each other over things like weight gain or worsening grades. Things we never did before that or since then. November came and went with minimal incidents, and before we knew it, we were packing our bags, getting ready to head out to our hometown for winter break. Before we were able to leave, though, the blanket fell off the wall. This not only led to me having more sleepless nights again, but my fiancée began to think she was going crazy when she'd see movement out there at night. I lied though. She'd say she saw something outside the window and I'd tell her it was a car or someone out for a night walk. I don't know why I did this, but I did. Both of us could not wait to get out of that place for a few weeks to just relax for a bit, especially with how much we struggled with that first semester of college. However, our winter break would destroy me. Somehow I'd caught pneumonia right before we were leaving, maybe a day or two before. I'm not sure if it was from exposure to the cold weather or if that creature had caused it. Worse was, while we stayed in our hometown, my pet hedgehog died of mites. He had them from his prior owner and struggled with them frequently. I cried for days, and I didn't want to do anything after he passed away. And arguably the worst of all was when I had to be rushed to the ER because of the amount of fluid in my lungs. I'd woke up choking, unable to scream. I punched the doors and walls of my parents' house in the hopes of waking everyone up. It worked, but by the time they found me, my lips were blue and my vision was hazy. I'd almost died. It scared the heck out of me, and worse, my family worried about me. They watched helplessly as I almost died in front of them. I still feel guilty over it, putting them through that. Despite my now horrible health and the death of one of my favorite pets, we had to go back to school. So we drove back and straight into the belly of the beast. Our drive back was scenic, snow falling all around us as we blasted show tunes and Christmas carols in the car. When we made it back, our dog was the first out and waited by the front door. We had a week before school started and were excited to have some alone time again after being surrounded by family the last few weeks. I rehung the blanket over the window and started to unpack my school things when we got weather warnings on our phone. A freak snowstorm was on its way, but it was supposed to miss us. We were only supposed to get the smallest bit of snow out of it. That day we ran around the park throwing snowballs at each other and chasing the dog around. The three of us were happy, but I couldn't be out in the snow too long, not with how sick I was. We went back inside, and sadly, that was the last time we'd get to enjoy the snow that week. We awoke the next morning to a sheet of white outside our windows, and when opening our front door to walk Rosebud, we were met with white everywhere. We could only see a few feet in front of us. Rosebud wouldn't walk very far in it, just enough to do her business. Then she'd run back, nearly pulling us over as she tugged with all her might at her leash. That first day, the knocking began. We immediately ignored it. We had discussed back in our hometown that I thought it was a skinwalker or wendigo. My fiancé thought the house was just haunted, possibly by a demon, but still just haunted. Neither of us would give the door knocking and window tapping any attention unless it somehow surprised us. That didn't stop it from freaking us out when it would happen for hours on end. But we knew not to open the door. We knew that no one would be out there knocking on our door in the middle of a freaking blizzard. The second day was worse, however, a trend that didn't slow during the blizzard. The blanket was on the floor when we woke up, the snow spinning past the window, visible despite the blinds being pulled down. Our dog was barking at the door, a quiet tapping sound all around us. It faded, but throughout the day, we'd hear taps followed by,
"Hello?
and
Who's there?"
for the whole day. It drove Rosebud mad. The two of us had to calm her down. This continued into the next day, but now there were voices from the apartment above us. The person who had lived there moved out over winter. At least we thought so. Thinking about it now, we never saw that person again, so I can't say whether they moved out or simply went insane. But from my experiences, I firmly think that whatever was in that apartment now wasn't either of the people living there before. The voices from above continued into the next day, sounding more and more clear and loud as the days went by, from just saying regular phrases to sounding like my fiancé and myself. Many times during the blizzard, we'd respond to things it said, only for us to find out the other had said nothing. The following day, screams could be heard from the apartment above us, more animalistic than human. We dialed 911 and informed them of a possible domestic dispute, and we were told they'd try to make it up there, but because of the snow, they couldn't guarantee a speedy response this time. They ended up stopping by next day, only to inform us the apartment was a mess and seemingly abandoned. However, when they checked with the front office, the rent was still being paid on time, so they figured someone must have broken in to take shelter from the storm. The sounds grew louder, and the taps became more forceful for the rest of the week. That Sunday, Anne and I were nervous about how we'd make it to school. The administration office sent out an email that despite the blizzard still raging, we were expected to go to class. We fought multiple times that day about what we should do. However, before the end of the day, the problem would solve itself, as all our teachers informed us to not show up to class, as they weren't going to show up either. The college was furious about this, but since the majority of teachers were practically on strike, school was postponed until the blizzard died down. We soon realized, however, that we needed more food, toilet paper, and clean clothes. The storm was predicted to last another week, and our supplies was dangerously low. Our dirty clothes had piled up out of the basket and onto the floor. We had ramen left to eat, and we were down to a single toilet paper roll when we decided we had to find a way to the store. On the bright side, however, we had an entire extra bag of dog food, so we didn't have to worry too much about Rosebud. Other than her doggy PJs she wore to keep warm were starting to smell a bit bad. But we had much more pressing issues to concern ourselves with. I bundled up and walked into the white void. My ears turned red instantly, and my nose began to run. We parked in the same spot every day if we could, but neither of us could remember after a week of being stuck indoors if we had this time. The snow crunched beneath my feet as I fell flat on my butt. I slowly stood myself back up and looked behind me to make sure the door to our apartment had been closed. Seeing that it was, I took a deep breath and turned back towards where I hoped the car was. I inched towards the edge of the street, readying myself for the steep step down onto the street. I pressed my car fob button in my jacket pocket with one hand and tried my best to cover my eyes from the snow with my other. A yellow glow shone out in the swirling white around me. The headlights. I walked in the direction of the car with my hand outstretched. I pressed against what I thought was the car when I heard my fiancée yelling that our dog had gotten out when I left. I spun around and screamed our dog's name in a panic. She was nearly all white and just about impossible to see in the snow. My fiancée yelled for me again.
I saw her go into the park.
Okay, I'll go find her. Throw on a jacket before following me, I replied. Crunch by crunch and step by step, I walked past my car into the park, calling for my dog Rosebud. The cold air found its way inside my throat, and all the warmth from my home had already left me. Rosebud! I yelled into the flurry around me. I whistled and called into the park, my throat growing hoarse quickly, with my lungs already working overtime as is. Rosebud! I screamed at the top of my lungs, the ending of which tore my throat up something fierce. Another shout sounded from my apartment door.
I'll be right there. Do you see her?
My fiancée yelled over the wind. No sign of her, I responded hoarsely. The wind picked up as I walked towards where I heard my fiancée's voice. The crunching of the snow was barely audible. I found myself back in the street without any sign of my fiancée. I must have passed her, I thought. I yelled out her name the best I could, followed by an intense coughing fit. She responded behind me back in the park. Wait there, I'll meet you, I called out.
No, we have to find Rosebud. Just hurry up.
She snapped uncharacteristically at me. But I understood. We called Rosebud our child and pampered her the best we could, with a college budget, of course, especially after our hedgehog died. I ran after her, coughing as I went, sucking in snow and freezing air as I did. I fell over in a heap in the snow and slipped, attempting to get back up. Something ran across my back, knocking the wind out of me. She's over here. Rosebud, come here, girl, I shouted joyfully.
Oh, I got her. Bo, come here and take her leash. She's freaking out.
I heard my fiancée yell deeper in the park. I walked towards her voice, reaching for a hand holding a leash that I couldn't see. Where are you?
Over here, lovey,
she yelled back in response. I followed in a new direction, taken aback as to why she had called me over if she was just going to take her back home. Just walk her to me, I called back.
Okay,
Anne responded. A shadow approached in the snow, but I didn't hear any crunching of her feet or jangling of the leash. But I had been out there for a bit. I might have just been dehydrated or tired and was just imagining things. The snow picked up, and the figure vanished into it, when suddenly I felt a sharp pain in my side. I screamed in pain, louder than I knew I could, louder than when I was calling for Rosebud or my fiancée. I fell in pain as a coughing fit took over after the scream. The sound of snow underfoot approached me quickly. I panicked and I began to crawl. I didn't know which way I was facing, but anywhere was better than where it thought I was. Arms wrapped around me, and I tried to scream again. My voice caught in my throat, and I began to cough again, a copper taste filling my mouth.
Are you okay? What happened, lovey?
My fiancée asked as she helped me to my feet. I could only hack up my lungs in reply as she brought me back inside. It turned out Rosebud never did escape the apartment, and my fiancée had never been out there helping me look. She had heard me scream around the time she thought I would have been back. She undressed me and drew me a hot bath and turned the heater up more than before. Bills be darned. On the side I felt pain were 2 deep gashes. I cleaned them in the tub as she searched for warm, clean clothes for me to wear. She had saved my life that day, finding me out there and taking care of me after. I had somehow been out there for nearly half an hour, screaming my lungs out, wandering aimlessly in our park. Ironically enough, if whatever or whoever hadn't attacked me, I might have died out there. The rest of the week was a blur for me. I'd become more ill than before, and we were waiting on the snowstorm to die down before taking me to the emergency room. Anne made a surprisingly amazing nurse for a music major, and Rosebud made for great company when Anne faced the storm alone and came back with food and toiletries in tow. Nothing odd happened to her on the way, other than discovering that the road to the hospital was out. We weren't going to call anyway. An ambulance or 2 had already crashed when going to the university to pump kids' stomachs who drank too much while being cooped up for too long. But now we were for sure going to just wait it out. With 2 of our 3 problems sorted, all we needed now were clean clothes. But with the laundromat's pipes bursting and the entrance practically being snowed in, we decided to wash our clothes in the tub and let them air dry. Somehow we survived, and a certain gift was proof of what we first thought were shared delusions. There were bare human footprints and coyote footprints by our window. This terrifying discovery would be repeated every snowfall after that, but to my knowledge, that was the worst of it while we lived in Flagstaff. Our friends would occasionally tell us that they heard tapping on the window when they were over for Dungeons and Dragons, or that odd noises would come from the apartment above, or the downright freaky night I had to drive Anne to the hospital, only for the same 5 deer to follow us all the way there and back to our apartment. The way they watched us drive and turned their heads felt wrong, yet despite being freaked out, no harm came out of it. Nothing else traumatic happened in Flagstaff, other than being financially unable to continue going to school there. Odd glimpses of someone watching us from our upstairs neighbors were the worst after that. The only night that stood out while we still lived there was the night of my birthday when my fiancée and I heard a clear as day, "Happy birthday," come from outside our window that night. I wish I could say that was the end, but whatever it was followed us as we moved back to our hometown. It all started back up again on the night when a blinding bright light shone into our bedroom at my dad's place. The world went silent as it washed away the darkness, and as quickly as it came, it went. The sounds of the world came back, but it wasn't like a predator had shown up. No, it was just that everything went silent. My fiancée and I had looked at each other and spoken to one another, but neither of us was able to even hear our own words. And after that night, the tapping and knocking began again. Rosebud had stopped barking at it. I think she must have gotten used to it, but my dad's dogs were driven insane by it, barking at all hours of the night. The last major incident to happen for over a year was one of the worst. My fiancée and I were packing up, getting ready to move across the country to live with my family in the South. We were watching a show on Netflix. It was a stormy night, but clear as day against the sound of the wind howling and the house rattling were footsteps in the gravel. Anne checked the window to see if my dad was home, but only our car sat out front. Then I heard someone walking up the wood steps to the front door. I raced to the door and saw it as it began to open. I pushed against it as whatever was outside pushed back. It nearly flung open. My fiancé ran into our room to get our baseball bat, while Rosebud growled and barked at the would-be intruder. From the other side, I heard my dad demanding to be let in, stating that I had invited him over. But none of this made sense as we were living with him. He was supposed to be out with his girlfriend that night anyway. I dug my heels in and pushed with all my might, then turned the lock once I heard the door slam back into its frame. Anne made it back into the room, and we all heard it run towards the window of my dad's room. It began to bang on it. We called the cops at that point and hid in the dining room. When they arrived, the officer talked down to us about not calling the cops over wind. We explained it wasn't wind, that whoever it was had been talking and we heard footsteps. But the officer was having none of it, telling us not to call again from this address. Luckily, that was the last time we'd have to call the cops. I want to say once we moved in with my mom in Alabama that things were great, but they honestly weren't. My stepfather ended up becoming extremely abusive towards all of us, and after a year of torture, we moved back to our hometown with our tails between our legs. It was in the return trip nearly a year later that the last major event with this thing took place. Of all of them, this one is the one that stuck with me the most. As we were making our way back to Arizona through New Mexico, we had decided to drive through the mountains to cut the trip down by a day. Of course, as our luck would have it, we were caught in a freak snowstorm. Anne was driving at the time, and I ended up having to navigate how the road turned by GPS as we were driving completely blind by a certain point. Rosebud was whimpering by my feet, and my fiancé and I had to work together to avoid possible cars coming from the other direction. But it was in that snowstorm on the side of the road that I saw a white figure following us through the whole storm. It watched and waved at me as I occasionally looked out into the mesmerizing swirls of snow. This idea terrified me, that if our car broke down, that we'd be greeted by this thing that had waited for us to return, waiting for another chance to attack. When we reached the end of the storm, I took a final last look at it, staring down our moving truck. I have seen it since, and I've heard tapping on the window from time to time, and while I feel it may not be over yet, it hasn't tried anything for a long time. I want to say as I'm typing this out, I can hear tapping on my window and whispers in my fiancé's voice, but truthfully I don't. Besides the occasional creak in my attic and thud from my shed, not much happens anymore. I think the most was my parents hearing something bang on the kitchen wall, but nothing ever came of it. I sometimes have nightmares about that snowstorm in the mountains, of that thing silently watching us. It's something I kept to myself until now, and hopefully writing this will help with the healing process and reoccurring nightmares.